Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our first live stream and Q&A in about a month and a half. It's been definitely the longest hiatus we've ever had since we started doing these weekly, 2 years ago. The strategy for our channel has been obviously changing. We discussed that last stream, but for those of you who missed it or didn't watch that stream, our plan moving forward is to do these streams, take your guys' questions, Q&As once a month, and then we will also try to be doing more reactionary types of streams, reacting to things that that are big news and things that are coming out that we want to talk about, maybe a little bit shorter news-specific streams, and then one Q&A stream per month. So that's our new strategy. And this is our stream for July. We did one at the beginning of June, so that kind of counted for then. We were waiting for some more news or something to come out to talk about, and just nothing. So we thought might as well wait till the end of Comic-Con and then do a recap here, talk about the latest in Comic-Con, not just the Star Wars stuff, but I'm sure you guys want to talk about Marvel and maybe some DC and some of the other stuff that came out via Comic-Con. So we're going to dive into the Star Wars stories and then take your guys' questions. So if you want to talk about Marvel or something like that, put it in the chat. We're going to go through as many as we possibly can here in this hour and a half-ish long show. Hopefully you guys have all had a great last month, enjoyed your summer so far. There's been a lot of fun things this summer, from the World Cup to now Comic-Con. So many things have happened since we last talked to y'all. So hopefully you're having a great summer so far as we enter into the final month of the summer season. There's been a lot of great movies to talk about as well. All right, so without further ado, let's get into our first topic. And our topic is going to be the Star Wars Comic-Con announcements, of which there was fairly little, but publishing did deliver, as they usually do, with some fairly good announcements moving forward. Obviously, it is Comic-Con, so the announcements were very much so comic book focused, but we did get the major announcement of one new Star Wars book, and that is going to be Twin Crossroads by Beth Revis. So this is pretty exciting. We obviously have Leia and Luke teaming up in a book. For those of you who haven't checked out our review of Star Wars Legacy, we obviously just had a Leia book in the last, I guess it came out, did it come out last week or is it coming out this week? One of the two. We read it like a month ago, so it feels like it came out a long time ago. But check out Star Wars Legacy, our book review for that. But that dealt with Leia. Now we're getting more Leia and the first Luke book in a while as well. And it seems to be tackling, obviously their relationship and training together and that type of stuff, a lot of which was referenced heavily in Star Wars Legacy. There's a lot of Leia, like, reflections towards the past, without spoiling anything, because I don't think it's come out yet, or if it just came out, you probably haven't had enough time to read the book. There is a lot of Leia retrospective towards the New Republic era, because it is a Leia-centric book. And so I think this should kind of build off of that a little bit. So we have officially the announcement for this book. Obviously not final cover art, but it looks pretty awesome. Biggest announcement, San Diego Comic-Con, and again, this article is from Star Wars Newsnet, was that a new story about the Skywalker twins set shortly after the events of Return of the Jedi sees Luke seek to train his sister Leia in the ways of the Force as his first Padawan, but both have complicated, conflicting ideas about both of their parents and what the Jedi Order means for a galaxy still recovering from decades of the Empire's reign. Jedi training is interrupted when both Skywalkers are tasked with infiltrating Coruscant, which is still deeply controlled by what's left of the Empire. As they must head into the Imperial Palace, formerly the Jedi Temple, Beth Revis, who previously wrote the young adult novel Rebel Rising and the novel Princess and the Scoundrel, returns as the author of Twin Crossroads, and that is ultimately the synopsis. So pretty exciting. Also features a pretty pivotal plot line for the new Star Wars canon, that something that was incredibly important to the EU. It was obviously resolved in Wedge's Gamble in the X-Wing series in that particular part of the Star Wars continuity, but we've never really seen how they reclaim Coruscant in canon. It is just something that they have done when we see it in The Mandalorian. So, very much so looking forward to reading this, looking forward to getting more Luke, looking forward to getting more Leia. As for Beth Revis as a choice, I think she is a very strong choice. Rebel Rising is very underrated. People, or I should say underread. I think people who have read it rate it very highly, but not that many people have read it. So go back and read Rebel Rising. It is truly essential if you're interested in the character of Jyn Erso and interested in Rogue One. But she does a great job in Princess and the Scoundrel, and I think all the best stuff she does with that story is all the character work. It's great character work for Leia, great character work for Han. She even has good scenes with Luke when he's in it, briefly at the beginning. So I think she's an inspired choice. Hopefully, this delivers on the plot line, and we get some really juicy stuff that continues to build off of what they've been doing with Leia over the last couple weeks. And I can't wait to see how this ultimately ties into all the publishing that they're going to push next year for the 50th anniversary.
Yeah, I mean, I do think to start off with, Legacy doesn't come out till the 28th, so we might be just telling you guys a little bit of stuff about the book on accident here, just because it has, like Liam said, it's been a while for us. So if we start leaking a little bit, hopefully it's not too much. It's definitely not going to be around the main plot or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I was hoping we'd get something even more ambitious at this point. Like, we'd hear something about like, hey, we're going forward with another new initiative. It doesn't have to be as big as the High Republic, but I thought we were in the space now to actually just be like, hey, we can do 2 3 year initiatives. We only plan 5 or 6 books out, but here's some of your classic original trilogy characters. Here's some characters that are from other slightly abandoned properties who can like be supporting characters in the comics and pop in and have some interesting roles in these couple books as they interact with bigger heroes or more pertinent heroes and villains for a time period that could be anything from the early days of the New Republic, which still is kind of held hostage by Filoni and Favreau, and what we got moving forward. Obviously, with stuff like Starfighter in the works coming out next year, just getting more to fill in the gap between High Republic and Acolyte, and then maybe stuff post Acolyte. There's just so many avenues to explore right now for publishing where you feel like you can still make a dent without feeling like this is the end all be all of everything that is shaped in this time period, right? That's something you could argue that the Banterverse, as much as these stories are all kind of written around the same time, it does make the galaxy feel a little small in the sense of like Luke, Han, and Leia are always at the center of solving something pretty much. So I was hoping, okay, at least we don't have to commit to something that big, but again, if we're gonna build up the strengths of canon, let's work on characterization, but have like an important plot point. Like you said here, something with Coruscant. I think the only thing we have so far about Coruscant in canon is Masamita kind of just signs over the planet. Like he just surrenders pretty quickly. There's stuff happening like with just on ground revolutions and stuff like that. But to what extent that can be expanded out, that could be like built upon if the planet is going to be completely taken over by treaty in a year, or if the underworld and different levels are kind of hidden off, chopped off away, still kind of fighting their own or trying to claim their own space away from both Imperial Remnants and New Republic. Like there's so many ways to explore Coruscant, because Coruscant in so many ways is like how I feel about planet Earth and the solar system, right? We know so much about space and there's so much more to learn, and yet we probably know more about space than like our own oceans, right? And to me, the oceans of Coruscant are just the thousands and upon thousands of levels that you can go further and further deep into the core, right? Everything that we know and any sort of book that's kind of happened has just been like 1,000 levels here and there, but for the most part, you're still on the surface of the planet. So I'd like to see if this is just a way for Coruscant to continue to become and adapt and change. Obviously, the New Republic rotates their planet of governance, the capital planet, for its 30 years under Mod Mothma. They do a lot of demilitarization. Obviously, some of that is being tweaked a little bit more directly in canon by having more of an emphasis on Imperial remnants coming here and going and on and off, and to some extent, we're probably gonna get like something as big as a Thrawn stuff kind of handled in Ahsoka, in whatever comes next for the Mandalorian, but you could still do really interesting things with our main heroes, with biggest characters and forgotten characters who can just kind of just shape up even more of this Wild Wild West of this early New Republic. So very excited for that. Obviously, I'm also excited to just see Luke and Leia just do a novel together. I think the last time it was just those two together. I don't think we've had anything honestly since like Spectre of the Mind's Eye. There's no way that I think that's not possible, is it? But it very well might be that this is like the first book with them as the lead characters, and that was written in what 1978 or something, right? So definitely really fascinating to see a post falling in love with Han and that sort of dynamic and relationship becoming a lot more central to her life. What it's like to now really discover what it means to be brothers with Luke, what it means to be siblings, and not just siblings, but siblings in the Force and siblings that are here to shape the New Republic, to rebuild the new Jedi Order, and everything that's going to go on with that, right? So, very fascinating stuff. And I think we mentioned this before, and I'm kind of working on an idea for this for a video sometime. But as much as like I wanted these big initiatives in Star Wars, at least one thing I'm starting to notice a little bit more in the last like 3 4 years is that we're having these like pseudo series kind of happen where there's material that is referencing each other that hasn't necessarily happened quite yet, or is vaguely covering parts of something that can be further expanded upon, is taking direct plot points and direct mentions of events in other stories and starting to really connect it all together. I mean, obviously a big example is Star Wars Legacy. I think if you're a fan of Shadow of the Sith, you'll see like there are some really important parts about it that are connected into here. This story, again, also taking place on Agent Class for a lot of the training too. This is just like almost becoming like a sort of pseudo trilogy. And if you're a fan of Leia, you obviously got stuff like Bloodline and how she was in as a New Republic senator and the fall of her position before she becomes the Resistance General and all that stuff, right? So there's not necessarily initiatives planned around our big characters of the original trilogy, but this idea that we can take some impactful stories that have mostly been character driven and start just adding more and more layers and eventually creating plot and important events that may or may not be referenced, but do definitely shape these characters whenever we see them next in a visual time period and some sort of content. That'd be great. I don't know if this is just an intentional thing, but I've noticed at least with Legacy, we're starting to see dots kind of be connected together. And I think as fans who are, have obviously grown up on the EU and everything, I'd love to continue just digging deeper and further into that. I'm not begging for like a new Jedi Order of 17 novels that are just super hard to collect and find, half in science fiction book club hardcover, half not, right? But if you just give us a couple of like trilogies and duologies and kind of just build out different areas of the world, that would be great, and if it can connect to other stories and just bring up little points and characters, great, because another big thing we definitely brought up in our legacy review is that all these original characters, as much as you can really enjoy them and like them, if they don't show up again, if they don't have any reference to them again, there's no point to them other than just being plot devices for our heroes. And if you want our heroes to grow and change and be affected by the galaxy that they're trying to redeem and trying to grow back together in this early days of the New Republic, especially with this having the point of view of Leia from always going to have a bit of a political angle, from Luke with just trying to restart the order, going back to the home planet of the prequels and really connecting to their family secrets and what new things we can learn about the Jedi that could be from new eras, High Republic, whatnot. You really still have to make a bit of an effort to make these things feel consistent and bigger than they have been so far.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. One of the criticisms, again, going back to Legacy, was particularly that a lot of these stories feel like they need more, and it's just frustrating that we haven't gone the route of at least creating original stories but giving them multiple books to roam. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully entering a new era of Star Wars where we do go back and focus on a lot of the OT characters in novels. I mean, it's probably just for uh, this particular story because it's 50th anniversary, right? But we will see if they can eventually get this going where we can have more tie ins to classic characters while also continuing to explore new stuff. And I'm hoping for more in the future. Maybe D23. D23 is not usually a very publishing heavy event, and right now, Disney's all in on Marvel. But it doesn't mean that we can't get maybe a few more details sprinkled in there. But I would imagine Celebration next year, even though it's already a couple months into the year, is where we truly get the outline for what they're planning on doing. Just like Disney kind of did with the 70th anniversary of Disneyland, or we've seen a lot of companies do with big anniversaries, whether it was a Nintendo last year with Super Mario. A lot of companies use the year after an anniversary to really push into even more content and use the year of the anniversary to just kind of kickstart it. And so maybe 27 is kickstarted with the theatrical releases. It's continued with Celebration, where they really announce stuff, and the true 50th anniversary continues and runs through all of 28 as well. So we will see about that. Let's get to the next story here. And I do see your comment, HD. I'm going to fix it when I pass to Sonic here in a second. I'll try messing around with some things. Not really sure why it's only on the left side, but we're going to have to run with it for right now. Next story is that I particularly really like this. The original trilogy is receiving unabridged audiobooks for the first time ever. These are the only Star Wars novelizations that don't have unabridged audiobooks. All the video game novelizations have them. All the sequel films and the 2 Star Wars story films have them. All the prequels got them. The original trilogy are the only Star Wars novelizations with no audiobooks, unabridged audiobooks, I should say. And so I think this makes a lot of sense. They did just do all these reprints of the original Star Wars saga 6 films for in like trade paperback size for the novelizations, and I thought that was really cool. I like the unified design. Not particularly my favorite covers ever, but I do like that they all have a signature unified look, and I think that always is welcome, especially as a collector of like books. Who everybody, you have them on your bookshelf, and you want to look at them and want them to look nice. It's nice to see them all the same color spine, the same design, all of that. So they're not like my favorite covers ever, but I do like ultimately the choice they went with to make them all unified. But I'm very excited for the novelizations. So we've started to kind of exhaust every book in Legends and Essential Legends collection. For some reason, even certain ones that are pretty hyped up, like Choices of One, they don't do a novelization for. Republic Commando, still no novelization. Han Solo and Lando, Calrissian Adventures, no novelization. But then you get other ones randomly that get novelizations, or audiobooks. I meant to say, I keep saying novelization. But the original trilogy really makes a lot of sense, and maybe this will kickstart another push and another initiative. They've been working with with Audible a ton lately with these originals and exclusive little short pieces on Audible. I would love it if they just committed to saying, hey, we're going to do all of the Star Wars books that we've never done on unabridged, and just continue to give people a way to get into this universe, get into the expanded universe, get into canon. It doesn't matter. Get them reading Star Wars. Literature, and especially novels, have been so important to the legacy of Star Wars that I'm glad the 50th anniversary is acknowledging that with these audio versions of the original trilogy, and I hope it does continue to lead to more here in the future.
Yeah, these are some interesting cover arts. I feel like I've seen these kind of floating around before, just not attached to the book. So not sure how much effort they're doing. I think this is more like you said, just for like a visual unionization of everything. It'll be cool to get unabridged audiobooks for the other two. I don't know if there was ever one for the original Star Wars, but just having all three, that's great. That being said, I agree. You know, we need to get that pushback of having that same energy that we do for Star Wars movies and for Star Wars animation as we once did for the novels, for everything that's come out of them, that, they get all-star treatment. They don't get these, really weak audiobook versions like we see a lot of times with the young adult books versus what we see with the adult novelizations, the difference between a solid adult novelization audiobook versus a audio drama. Like we in 2026 should not be having less when it comes to the audio versions of stories, especially in generations that are much more used to audiobooks. They're so much more used to listening to the books that they read to, as opposed to just reading them on a screen. And when they do read them on a screen, more oftentimes than not on an e-reader, right? So if we have the technology to make these stories as alive as possible, even if we have to start with older stories, fine, right? Like I think maybe Essential Legends, like you said, just kind of got too big for itself, adapting most of those books and then not necessarily feeling essential anymore, just kind of feeling like Disney just republishing everything, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm excited for stuff like that, just to have a little bit more love again. I just know that the reputation of the original novelization of Star Wars is well regarded. Obviously, it's kind of ghost written anyways into leading into Spectre of the Eyes Past, right? That very first Star Wars novel ever created that could have been filmed as a low budget sequel to the original Star Wars based on how well it did in the box office. Obviously, that didn't happen because Star Wars became a global phenomenon. So, as wonderful as that was for everything attached to it, to the media, to the merchandising, radio dramas and all of that, the books feel like starting with episode 5, they've just fallen off, right? Like episode 5, I don't think is very good at all. I think it's just pulled straight from the script and kinda just said as is. I There's some weird quirks like Yoda being blue and stuff, so if you wanna, like, read it that way just to see what slightly changed in the days leading up to the actual filming script being happened, it's cool. You get a lot more out of the Return of the Jedi novelization, get a little bit more of the inner workings of the Empire, even some stuff prequel development of, like, ideas about Padme and just how things have gone with the twins and all that. So that's interesting. A lot more emphasis on Vader and the tragedy of Vader in this movie. The Ewoks also come off a lot more polished, well-rounded, maybe more capable without necessarily having the cartoon feel of, like, the Ewoks cartoons. So there's that. But yeah, I think ultimately, if you're gonna pick up these audiobooks, it's because you're a huge collector and you just wanna see a little bit new shine on these old stories, right? That's how I look at it, honestly. But if you're looking at this as like, "Oh, this will be incredible and you'll get some huge new insights," that's not the purpose of this. This is just more just to celebrate that we're entering the 50th next year more than likely, and we're gonna get the, fully polished 4K restorations of the original versions of the film. So why not also put out the original versions of the stories as they were told in text, just with something that kind of makes them a little bit more appealing to audiences in 2026 by actually having something that they never did have. So that's cool. I just hope that they really are putting their effort into the quality of them, even if the second story is not the best, and if the first story is kind of really out there at points compared to the final version movie, and 6 continues to, like, be very contradictory even to the EU of the time.
How does this sound, HD? I believe I fixed it. I'm not really
I
sure
don't
what
think I can hear you,
happened.
Liam.
You can't hear me?
Um,
I'm getting levels. Let's see.
no, I cannot hear you anymore. Oh,
Okay.
HD Game Tube says it's fixed.
Perfect.
I think that's fine if I can't hear Liam. I'll just work with that.
Let me see if I can fix it up here on Video Ninja when we're done. But anyway, in regards to the novelizations, yeah, I mean they're not the best pieces of Star Wars novelizations or Star Wars novels. Certainly, the prequels add more to their stories because they were written in conjunction with the films rather than it being kind of more of a promotional stunt. So, um, it is kind of a completionist type deal, but I am very much so looking forward to that completionism nonetheless. Next story. Let's move on to this. Thanks for working with us with some of these kinks. We're trying to get more live stuff and B-roll and interaction into the streams. So there are going to obviously be some things that we have to iron out, but we'll hopefully figure it out for the next time. Star Wars celebrating 50 years is coming out. This is written by Pablo Hidalgo, and it is going to just feature tons of articles and really examinations of all these different things that are part of Star Wars history. So you see here a chapter about James Earl Jones, you got Hayden Christensen and Anakin, and just awesome behind the scenes stuff across all the films and the TV shows. So lots of really great stuff there. I'm looking forward to checking that out. For me, coffee table books and like insider books, whatever you would call those, reference books, I guess. Those aren't day one purchases for me, but those are things that I like to pick up over time. So I definitely will be interested in checking that out. And if I hear it's great, maybe I'll check that out even earlier. We have Star Wars Icons coming out, which delves into the in-universe history and real-life inspirations behind the most iconic character in the Star Wars franchise, Darth Vader. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. We also got the announcement of Star Wars X-Wing Academy, which is going to feature these younger characters written by Scott Peterson, Joshua Pruitt. I want more X-Wing stuff. I want more Star Wars pilot stuff. Not necessarily sure if X-Wing Academy is going to satisfy that craving, but I am looking forward to nonetheless maybe moving in that direction a little bit more. It looks like here this Ludi character as well is like a bigger version of Nubs from the Young Jedi Adventures, something like that. Looks interesting. We got another Phineas and Ferb Star Wars announced, so that's pretty cool. We're also getting the Nightmare on Navarro, Mandalorian, and Grogu book, written by Delilah S. Dawson and illustrated by Alessandro Rinaldi. This new comic. We have all these other comics as well coming out here, and then of course tons of new covers and solicits for new Star Wars comics that are coming soon in the next few months. Here we have the Fall of Kylo Ren series, Book of Boba Fett covers, the Rogue One shots are continuing. We got the Chirrut and Baze cover, Darth Vader, multiple covers of Darth Vader, and we have all of these comics coming here in the future. So if you're interested in Star Wars comics, lots of cool stuff coming. Again, with the Star Wars comics side, like, they have some stuff coming out that I'm interested in, but for the most part, I think the comics are in desperate need of a revamp and refresh, and they really could use a lot more of a relaunch and new life here moving into the 50th anniversary. So I'm interested to see what they have for us in the world of comics. San Diego Comic-Con is the biggest Comic-Con of the year. It's the one that the word Comic-Con mostly applies to. Like when you hear people say Comic-Con, it's the San Diego Comic-Con. But there are tons of other Comic-Cons throughout the year where we could hear even more announcements for the future of Star Wars comics. So just because we didn't get a ton of crazy new announcements, to me, doesn't change the fact that I think we can get more here in the future. But I do really want to know where we're going, and just the same way we talked about how books really need to take off with more duologies, more trilogies, more large-scale storytelling. I would love Star Wars comics to get back to that, but they also don't all need to be interconnected. I'd love 2 or 3 different eras to have broader, more large-scale storytelling, like they used to do back in the day when we had Clone Wars and Old Republic going on at the same time. Then we had Star Wars Legacy right around that era as well. So they weren't afraid to jump around and do multiple ongoings that lasted for a long time and featured very different characters. I'd love to get back there. They don't always have to cross over, as much as it is fun sometimes to have Vader and Star Wars and Afra and all those lines cross over. I would prefer to get more varied eras and more varied storytelling and a lot more new characters here, maybe given some run in the future. That's pretty much it from the publishing side. We had some more stuff about Reign of the Empire. We also have Eyes Like Stars, which just came out this past week, so we're actually reading that right now. I'm not sure if we're going to review that or not. We kind of have taken a step back from YA reviews, just people don't seem to care about them. But we are reading it, and I'm interested in seeing how it is overall. We also got the announcement of Indiana Jones comic, which I'm kind of excited for this. Indiana Jones has had a very much so a small presence in comics over the years. He had some small miniseries in Marvel when Marvel had the Star Wars license back in the 80s. He had some runs with Dark Horse back in the 90s and early 2000s, a handful of miniseries. I don't think anything was over 6 issues, 5 issues. Dark Horse was really big on the miniseries back in the mid 90s and early 2000s, so I know I have quite a few Indiana Jones issue number ones from around that era. But he hasn't had much of a presence in comics since the early 2000s on. So I'm looking forward to seeing a new Indiana Jones comic. It is a miniseries, but nonetheless, maybe if it's great, we can get Indiana Jones becoming a new mainstay in the world of Lucasfilm Marvel team ups here in the future. But out of all the publishing side of Star Wars here, Senek, what things look the most exciting to you when it comes to all the new announcements, whether it's the new comics, whether it's the reference books, Indiana Jones, all of that type of stuff? What's the most exciting to you that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting kind of backwards, I am excited to have Indy have something of a presence again. It's been 3 years since Dial of Destiny now, right? It's kind of sad to say, like, oh, that is the end of what we know about Indiana Jones. But there's still plenty of life that he's lived. There's some very interesting things that Dial of Destiny reveals about the time period between movie 3 and 4, and we don't have to really get into between 4 and 5. I think that's a lot more volatile of a time for the whole Jones family as a whole, and a lot of resetting in a way that people don't really love when it comes to like 2010 requels and movies and stuff like that. But in this case, might have been necessary because of the character of Shia LaBeouf these days. But still, Indiana Jones not getting a recast, I'm okay with that. Not getting any more stories, that would be silly, right? So seeing stuff like The Great Circle and all that get well received, keeping Indiana Jones alive in some way, I think that's always gonna be the case. I can't wait to see more games. I'd love to see, like, audio dramas. I think I'd love to see, like, the concept of the radio drama play kinda be reused in audio dramas and have Indiana Jones be alive in that way, right? And it would be very fitting for the time period of the character when that would be the dominant form of entertainment and communication. So, why not, right? Keep that going. Uh, Keep pushing Indiana Jones where you can. I think not to sound sad about it, but I think there's no way that I can't be conditioned to believe that at some point Harrison will be recast, probably after, in like 20, 30 years when he's pretty much guaranteed not to be here anymore, unfortunately, right? So I can see that. I can very much see them trying to fill in stories and do that. But, if they're not gonna do that with Alden in a young Han Solo role where he can still play a younger version of Han despite being the same age, if not older, than Harrison was when he took on the original Star Wars, it's like, okay, then if you're not committing there with Star Wars, no place where that character makes sense to get recast or deep faked or whatever, there's no chance for Indiana Jones, especially because of how much Harrison loves that character, how much Spielberg and Lucas wrote around Harrison and what they wanted to bring out his qualities for with that character. Yeah, and in some ways, maybe he is a bit of an age character for some people. Like I get it. It's harder to relate more than ever to stories of 1930s, you know, archaeologists fighting against Nazis, right? You would think that would be an everlasting story. Nah, not always, unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, seeing how Ford didn't necessarily get that whole Jones family archaeology off the ground, I think that was the last big swing that they possibly could have had unless they did a '90s Indiana Jones film that never came to fruition. Dial of Destiny just feels like a, "Let's land this plane as smooth as we can," and I think it does. It's definitely not the same highs as the original 3 films, so sort of pandemonium. This looks very classic. It reminds me of like even just textile used on the old 90s video games and stuff like that. But let's continue pushing indie in all of those formats, even if we can't necessarily get a TV show with grown up short round or something to start filling in those gaps, the many adventures of indie's companions or whatnot. So we'll see how that all plans out. X-Wing Academy, I mean, I feel the same way. It's not a Marvel series either, which yeah, it feels like it's gonna just be childish, especially with that, like you said, that Nubs alien looking design. Yeah, that doesn't give me a lot of confidence, but it's still fine. I'd like to see just a push again to have X-wing pilots. I'm not gonna judge it by its cover. I remember like hearing about Star Trek, um, that one animated show that like released its second season on Netflix. But it was like 3D animated. It's aimed more for kids, but it got pretty great reviews actually, and people were like really sad that it got kind of canceled and dumped away. So I'm not gonna say that this can't be an interesting starting point and see how the culture of being a pilot changes, but it's hard to reconcile that with what I wanna see in live action, what I wanna see in X-Wing style books. I don't think we necessarily have to have Rogue Squadron-like story again where they are s basically super commandos that can fit any and all missions, right? Like, that always seemed a little bit of a stretch at points, even if the writing and planning around it was pretty interesting and fun. But, yeah, this is not exactly what I'm looking for. I'd rather have had, like, a New Republic X-Wing Academy, dealing with, like, characters that are around in Black Squadron before a Poe and everyone starts to join up the New Republic Defense Fleet and stuff like that. So not super excited about stuff like that. Very excited for Fall of Kylo Ren. I wasn't really brought up again in Comic Con, but I believe Charles Soule said that he knows bigger plans in motion after this miniseries. Like you mentioned, Marvel is in some sort of weird crisis, so they just can't handle writing books across eras and with proper crossovers that don't feel like they take away from main lines. They've just been stumbling around for the last 4 or 5 years now, unfortunately. But yeah, I just don't love the idea. Um, yeah, I just don't love the idea that this is just possibly the only way we're gonna get real Kylo Ren story, and we're never gonna get back into Ben Solo storytelling. Is Ben Solo storytelling only gonna be locked before the Force Awakens? Stuff like that makes me a little concerned, especially with the news of just a few months prior of Hunt for Ben Solo, and then that going really nowhere. Just it's a bit of a shame. So I hope that what Soul is hinting at is that after these miniseries are, collected and whatnot, he's got a book in play, maybe something that can be almost like a companion piece to Star Wars Legacy that can really reference a lot of the stories that he is directly creating as a comic book writer into novel form because he's proven himself with the beginning and the end of the High Republic. Why not be able to handle a story that covers just the essentials of everything after episode 8 to episode 9 for this guy, whatever else that could be new and explored. Obviously something bigger than like what we got with Dark Lord or I'm blanking on the name of the Star Wars Vader book that we got recently. Um
Master of Evil.
yeah, Master of Evil, right? So yeah, it would be nice. It would be nice to get something bigger than that where in its focus entry and through the point of view of or Kylo Ren at this point, whatever he's going through, whatever the dyad is teaching him and showing him, everything with Tava Ren and everything going kind of crazy in his comics as the backdrop for it and moving closer into the Rise of Skywalker and hinting at past that point, right? If we could get a book like that, wonderful. But, I'm expecting it to just be another mini series of some sorts, maybe something set before his turn, and his fall to the dark side. That's probably what's more likely even before, you know, the rise of Kylo Ren or something like that. So there's things like that. But for the most part, I'm not super excited about much else. Rebecca Rowanhorse, I think she'll be fine for this second reign of the Empire book, but that excerpt that we heard of it and read of it just doesn't really have Freed style. It feels like a little bit of an imitation of Freed style, and he's really good at that military technical language and the weight of it and just intrigue, especially with so much espionage intrigue in the first book from the CIS perspective and the cultural war that they were fighting in a way with this one character who, don't really want to spoil. You can check out a review for, but just handled so well in companionship and in concert with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and whatnot. So, I'm excited for what happens next year. Obviously, the connection to Andor with Anton Krieger on the cover and stuff like that. That's all cool to me. I just, I've been pretty vocal about this from the start. I'm not super pleased with how much of a big jump that this is going to take place, getting right into the timeline of Andor when this could have actually been straight in that middle point and really dealt with like how did these militias even get into some sort of web of weak alliance before we get into the position that we are at the start of Andor. But that's fine. I don't mind fleshing out the Andoverse as it is, but this next one is the final one is also going to be set 6 months before A New Hope, right? Like it's going to be right right on the heels of the original storytelling. So yeah, not great, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Comics, I'm not super pleased by in the last year or so. Really, since the Battle of Jakku miniseries, just really just messed up a lot of how I felt about what could have been with the potential. But yeah, Marvel's a mess. The books, just other than the twins, you know, that's great to see them finally have a proper true Star Wars story again. One where I think Leia was gonna be way better serviced as a character than I saw a book from 1978 would do with that character and with how much she's grown in both the EU and especially in canon in her characterization. But yeah, for the most part, I don't know. I mean, D23, like you said, it's not really the place to get these sort of big updates for publishing. It's traditionally that New York Comic Con that we really get a lot of stuff that really feels like big swings, big hits, and announcements. And a lot of the stuff that we saw here had already been hinted at or previewed a little bit. So it sucks to say that Comic-Con wasn't as big as we're hoping when it comes to publishing, but probably they're just holding back with the 50th anniversary restorations and Starfighter, probably initiative around Starfighter. I don't know if it's going to be that journey to Star Wars Starfighter, but something more akin to that, maybe something with a little bit more heft than those stories did. Maybe that's where we finally see something, but not of anything we really saw at Comic-Con.
Yeah, it is disappointing, especially when almost everything that's come out this year was announced last year, or even the handful of things that were announced this year were like January, February. So it's not much of a there's not much of a presence for Star Wars publishing right now, and that is kind of strange going into next year. I mean, like I said earlier, very excited for the Twin Crossroads book. Like, I think it's an interesting idea. It's one we should finally tackle. But they are having a hard time getting away from anything to do with the movies, and we need original stuff as well as tie-in stuff. New Republic era is far more interesting to explore because it hasn't been explored that much. Dark Times, you've got to just it makes way more sense to explore the first 10 years in Dark Times if you're going to do that, because that's the era that hasn't really been explored yet when it comes to novels and when it comes to like rebellion type stuff. We've seen Bad Batch, we've seen Maul Shadow Lord, but that's why Mask of Fear felt relatively refreshing, even though on its face it was like, oh, another Dark Times book. It was because it was exploring a time period for those characters that we just haven't seen those characters explored in. And so jumping into Andor is a little bit disappointing. I'm sure that the end game will be interesting, but it's kind of like you know what's going to happen to all these characters, right? So you want to see them get there rather than jumping into where we already know they're at and just learning a little bit more about their headspace at that time. So hopefully it'll be really good, the next Reign of the Empire book. But yeah, I think it is a little bit disappointing seeing where that's all going. I mean, but you just look at this list, right? It's just a ton of comics that all tie into the movies, whether it's Rogue One shots, whether it's the A New Hope triple take from this Paper Cats publishing, Phineas and Ferb Star Wars, more stuff from Kevin Scott that's just kind of loosely around the original trilogy. The X-Wing Academy is maybe the most original thing here. You got Mandalorian and Grogu tie-in. You've got so many tie-ins. Even these, like the Book of Boba Fett and Rogue One shots, These are or the Book of Boba Fett adaptation is so unnecessary. I just don't I understand if you're a completionist who wants everything adapted, right? But why are we wasting publishing space and publishing time on adaptations of shows that are 5 years old? Like, it doesn't make any sense why you'd go back and adapt that. Why you go back and adapt Obi-Wan, go back and adapt Rise of Skywalker. At least Rise of Skywalker, you had done the other movies, so it was like one more. There's no reason to adapt Book of Boba Fett. There's no reason to go back and eventually adapt Andor. There's no reason to go back and eventually adapt Ahsoka, or they already did Ahsoka. So yeah, there's just, it seems like they're just killing time, Marvel, right now, until they figure out what to do. I'm sure they have a lot of discussions and plans about 50th anniversary, and 2026, before the year started in Star Wars, really felt like this was going to be the year we're really kicking off a new era of Star Wars. But about 3 months in, I think we all kind of saw the writing on the wall that 2026 is the dump it year, and then everything else that they're really excited about, everything they're really pushing, it's 2027 and beyond. And so hopefully this is just a little bit of the extra fluff that they've been working on over the years. It's kind of gap filler stuff. And then next year, like you said, San Diego Comic-Con, any of these other Comic Cons that are towards the end of the year, hopefully that's when we really get the meat of what is the true push for 50th anniversary Star Wars. And I'm hoping there's at least one new ongoing with our main characters and one new ongoing with new characters set in a different time period, set in some era where we can get to know and love new people. KOTOR comic is a great example. It's set in a time period that ties into games that were featuring characters that were completely different from the characters featured in the comic. So you can do things with new characters and original characters. I mean, Afra is an example of that as well. Just Afra never had the meaty, juicy storytelling that KOTOR comic had, where it actually tried to develop true, genuine lore for some of the characters and told the backstory of the Mandalorian Wars. That type of stuff we haven't seen from Star Wars. Not saying they'll do it, but it would be nice to jump into an era, even if it's New Republic era, that you tell a significant story with new characters that tie into the overall story that they're going to tell. I doubt it's going to happen, but we will see one day. But yeah, for me, it's easily Indiana Jones is the most exciting. I think Indiana Jones has such potential to be a truly great ongoing comic, even if it was just miniseries after miniseries after miniseries. It's a franchise that lends itself to this because it's based on pulp stories. And so I think it's shocking that Indiana Jones comics have never really taken off. And there aren't too many. I mean, I haven't really read very many of them outside of a lot of issue ones that I collected over the years. But it's shocking there's not a definitive Indiana Jones comic. And it's shocking that it's taken them, 15 years almost to do a new Indiana Jones comic since Disney's owned it and they own a comic book company. So it's really surprising that it's taken this long, but I'm pretty excited about it, especially because of the team. I mean, Jason Aaron kickstarted the Disney owned era of Star Wars at Marvel, and hopefully he can maybe kickstart something new here with Indiana Jones. Let's turn to your guys' questions though, because we have a lot of them, I'm sure, and it has been a while since we've seen y'all, so we definitely want to talk to you guys about all the latest from the world of movies and video games and comics, or whatever you guys want to talk about. So we're going to jump into the questions here for a little bit, and then we'll go back to some of the other stuff here a little bit later if we have some time. All right, so starting at the top here, we have Brandon, who says, the announcements for San Diego Comic-Con 2026 were incredible to hear for Marvel, DC, and even Avatar. I didn't expect to see any announcements for Spaceballs 2 or Ryan Reynolds dressed as Grey Deadpool in secret cosplay, but it was awesome to see that all happen at Comic-Con. Yeah, it was. The Marvel panel was, I think, good. I was a little disappointed in it overall. I mean, obviously I wasn't there, so I didn't get the hype of being in the room, but as an outsider who was watching a live stream of people, saying what was happening as it was happening, I was a little disappointed with what came out of it. There wasn't really much new news. Black Panther 3 has been in the works forever, so that wasn't really that shocking. It was cool to see who's playing our new Black Panther, and I think I'm forgetting his name. It's something Johnson, right? Um,
David Johnson.
David Johnson, and he was great in Alien, and I really liked his performance. So I think it's a good choice. Looking forward to seeing him take on that role, and I'm assuming he's going to be in Doomsday or Secret Wars or both, because why announce it now? So that's going to be cool. I'm interested to see if Ryan Gosling's going to be in Doomsday and Secret Wars. Excuse me. But yeah, a lot of cool stuff. The Ghost Rider thing, unfortunately, kind of got leaked before they announced it, so it lost a little bit of its luster, but also at the same time, it's been around for years that he's been wanting to play that role. I think Sean Levy, going back to Star Wars, being chosen to direct Starfighter just continues to show that Disney really likes and believes in him as a talent. And Starfighter must be really good if they're continuing to work with him, because Deadpool and Wolverine, although I thought it was good, not great, made a ton of money, and they liked working with him moving into Star Wars and then moving back to Marvel. Seems like he's found a little bit of a home there at Disney. And Ryan Gosling obviously must have enjoyed his experience working on Starfighter, because he came back to do that project with Sean. So really looking forward to Ghost Rider. I think that's the thing that hyped me up most about that panel. Other than that, it's a lot of stuff we already knew about. So not too much else. I mean, the Doomsday stuff, I'm looking forward to Doomsday. I've always been looking forward to Doomsday, but they've still yet to get me to the point where I'm like, I can't wait for December. I'm cautiously optimistic. The trailer was all right, but yeah, I think they need to do more and release more. I'm sure D23 is the next place they're going to try to drop a trailer. But and there's always been that push and pull ever since Disney started really pushing D23 as a must go to convention for film and TV. It used to just kind of be a Disney Parks thing. Now it's become such a prominent film and TV space. There's always been that push and pull of what do we show at Comic-Con and what do we save for D23. But I think Marvel really needs to kickstart this marketing towards Doomsday, because it's like a simmering hype. Like I feel like everybody's cautiously optimistic, like wanting to get hyped, and they have people like right there, but they need to drop that thing that just sends everybody over the top and gets them really hyped for what's coming next from Marvel. So we shall see. But yeah, overall Comic-Con had a lot of other good stuff in it. The Lantern trailer's great too. So yeah, some good announcements. Wish Star Wars had a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it just feels like Disney has realized that you got to prioritize the MCU and getting all of that right, and getting the clear pathways of what is a movie and what is a TV show in place. We've also heard rumors recently that after such a long period of gestating as a series turned into a movie, Armor Wars is now being considered for post Secret Wars, where you have Iron Man back. And I don't hate that idea, especially because that means that we could see Justin Hammer and everybody else there like brought back, and with our new Iron Man actor or something like that. It's sad because I was like, well, now I wanted to see what Rhodey's up to. What's War Machine going to do in this story? Connection with Ironheart and stuff like that. But those things are being kind of streamlined. They're trying to like clean up and put characters that work together into projects, and just focus on the ones that are necessary for what is essentially the deconstruction and reconstruction of Marvel, but now with the mutants properly folded in, now with Fantastic Four in the same timeline, probably all this and that. So we know we're approaching the end. Do we have enough for the end there? I mean, there's the argument that, Feige also made at Comic Con. He's like, yeah, everybody's gotten in their head that the Infinity Saga was all about Thanos. It wasn't all about Thanos. We had him in a chair yelling, saying he'll do it himself. And that was really about it until he showed up in Infinity War. The difference being that we had the Infinity Stones, which were very clearly marked and used and affected different parts and different types of characters in the Marvel Universe as they're introduced. I guess the closest thing we have to that right now is incursions and stuff like that, but we've got slightly different versions of them. So I'm very curious just how much they're gonna be either streamlined or like shown to be different or like adding new ones altogether. I don't know, right? There, but you really got to emphasize that in a way to make all of these characters that are now in this big team up movie to make sense. And it's also quite clear that the San Diego Comic Con trailer that was put out for Doomsday, I saw a very blurry version of it on my TikTok, but it is so much better than the one that we got with the one, like, what, a week ago, right? Like, it was nice, but it's just a lot of people standing and talking, and Doom, I know people are like, "Oh, he needed impact frames, halting, Stormbreaker and all that." I'm like, "I don't think he needed that," but I think seeing him more as, like, the harbinger of death and destruction and just how chaotic he can be instead of just being very clearly erased from some scenes and stuff like that. I don't know. I think that this is not the type of trailer where you, like, edit out people and stuff, and even, like, the return of Steve Rogers, it doesn't look like Steve Rogers and, like, and or how Chris Pine looks like, not Pine. Is it? Yeah, it's no, Evans. I don't know, how Evans looks like even in, like, just showing up at Comic Con and all that, he just looks a little different. I don't know if it's just he's a cover up for someone like a Loki or somebody who now would be also worthy of Mjolnir and all that, right? Like, I don't know. There's a lot about that first trailer I don't think is great, but I think it still did a really good job of just continuing that momentum that they already had from all these little clips and ideas and teases that they put out months and months ago. So I'm getting very hyped for Doomsday, but not necessarily because of Doomsday. I'm getting hyped for Doomsday because I'm very hyped for what Spider-Man is showing. The more tiny teasers and clips that we see, the more we see the original 3 all put together in interviews and all that. Now we get to put in, Bernthal as Punisher. Yeah, it is fun, and then seeing the Hulk look even slightly bigger than the Savage Hulk of, like, '08, and right, the chance that we might see different versions of the Hulk or something like that, like, the fact that, Sadie Six character is also very obviously Jean Grey, like, it's just this, like, "Oh, man, we're setting up so many big threads for Doomsday, for setting up for where these characters are gonna be now at an elevated position once more, a more classic Spider-Man, but one that seemingly is also gonna be an evolution of all 3 Spider-Man versions before. In some ways, Tom is almost becoming like the 4th live action Spider-Man by having the first ever second trilogy pretty much in works here, and organic webbing like we've seen and all that, like, all these things have been put out more and more officially, and you're like, "Oh, man," like, we're seeing an evolution for him, we're seeing a proper Hulk comeback, we're gonna see Punisher here, like, I'm excited, I hope that movie does a lot to, like, justify why he's MIA for the most part and everything with the TV shows with Daredevil, with the return of Punisher, with the return of, Iron Fist and the Hand and everything else that's gonna happen in season 3, right? If he's not gonna be a member of, like, the Defenders there because of TV restrictions versus movie restrictions of the Sony deal, at least make him, like, have cameos with these characters or, like, be around those scenes. You can't just say he's the best superhero in the trailers recently, like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, no, he's, like, become New York's shining beacon with how much crime he's eradicated," and ignore everything in that, and ignore everybody kinda getting blacked out by Sentry going crazy and Thunderbolts before they're all brought back, and just he is on a little bit of a fraud watch. As cool as the movie looks like, I just wanna know where he's been. Like, I don't want him to just be, like, depressed in his room and kinda doing his own thing as needed. I still think he needs to at least have references to these stories because even if you're gonna go back to the villain of Daredevil, Netflix and Daredevil and MCU, it's still Kingpin, and Kingpin is technically a Spider-Man villain first, right? So it's just I want that connectivity to happen. I want this to be an incredible film that's more traditionally Spidey and have a lot of fun banter with Hulk and Punisher and all that, and whatever else they're hiding. I'm so curious if Sadie Sink's character is a setup for Doomsday or beyond Doomsday. Like, this is such an early thread to put here, right? I think at one point movie was supposed to come out after Doomsday, so they definitely changed some of the plot as well, and timing wise, very similar to Multiverse of Madness. supposedly be set for before a No Way Home, and then that kind of being flip flopped and changing how American Chavez was used. I'm so excited for it. I'm excited for it to be focused on Spidey as we know him with classic villains, all this and that. But all these future things that they have to set up into Doomsday, what they're gonna set up into Secret Wars, past Secret Wars. Like this is a movie that has so much hype riding on it, and everything that's been released looks really, really good, and all internal positivity and reception has been leaking out in abundance. I really hope it's all that because then it puts pressure on on the fandom on the cinematic universe to follow it up really well with Doomsday. And obviously filmmaking is ahead of what we see. This stuff is years in advance. They're already working on setting up Secret Wars and filming that. They probably already saw the internal cuts of Brand New Day. Comparing that to what they're working on Doomsday doesn't make sense, what they're setting up, etc. Right? And does it even match the quality of what Destin had, considering he was originally signed on to do King Dynasty, right? So yeah, I think if this movie is a grand slam next weekend, I think whatever we feel about it's probably already further amplified within Marvel Studios for Doomsday, and even if it doesn't reach it per se, I'm hoping that the version of Doomsday we see definitely has characters that are missing from the trailers, definitely has a lot more of the action that we saw and heard about in the Comic-Con exclusive trailer, and we move forward into a timeline where, 2028 feels like 2018 again, where we have a Ghost Rider, we have an X-Men, and we have a Black Panther 3. That's a really stacked year for an MCU slate when it comes to movies, and we just haven't had that in a long time. And 2025 was a year for paying for kind of the sins, a lot of the mess ups of the Chip era, and just the volume over quality. But now feels like a great time to actually take that step forward and make it all right, and if Brand New Day can start us off on the right path and Doomsday can hit those notes, I think whatever happens with Secret Wars is guaranteed to at least be, my like a must see and mind altering to what you expect about the cinematic universe of Marvel. So I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm excited for even what's happening with the TV shows, but I'm just excited this feels like the MCU pre 2019 again.
Brandon's next two questions are: did you guys get to watch Minions and Monsters to see George Lucas? And then also, did you get a chance to see Legend of Aang on either big screen in LA or New York, or did you stream it on Paramount? First one, Minions and Monsters. I did see Minions and Monsters. Shockingly, the best Minions movie by far. Well, not that shockingly for the Minions franchise, but very close to me, to the original Despicable Me. I think that one, I wouldn't say I grew up with it because I was 12 or so when it came out, but it was a movie that I watched as a kid, so I think it means a little bit more. It has a little bit more to say. But I really enjoyed the homages in Minions and Monsters. I kind of couldn't believe it. There's like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin references in a kid's movie. It's probably why it's not doing as well as the other ones. But George was great in it. He was not in it very much, but his scenes are pretty funny. Legend of Aang, I have not gotten to see it yet. I don't live in New York or LA, so I won't be seeing it in a theater. But I will be checking it out on Paramount Plus here soon. I haven't gotten to watch very many movies, honestly, the last few weeks, so that will be certainly at the top of my watch list for the next few weeks as I kind of catch up on some things I missed over the last few weeks. I have been catching up on the new season of X-Men 97, though. That's been kind of my current thing I'm working on in the few hours I've had to watch movies and TV over the last few weeks.
I am the inverse of Liam. I have not seen Minions and Monsters. It was kind of sad to see that the last Minions movie had a really fun trend kind of going on with everybody getting dressed up, and this one just didn't. I think honestly, I think as well it's been received, and I know people like these new Minion leads that we have. Uh, Apparently, like, people are aware of, like, the names of, like, a trio of very specific minions, I guess, that have been around since Despicable Me 1, right? And yeah, it sucks not having them. I think that was genuinely, like, a limiting factor for some people who are diehard fans of the Minions and the Despicable Me franchise. I think a lot of it's also just fatigue. It's only been a couple years since the last Minions film, and definitely a lot of people didn't watch it as it was coming out. They probably watched it when it was on streaming and whatnot. So there's a delay of that. The Despicable Me mainline films, from what I can tell, 4 was not super well received. Didn't make as much money as 3 did. So it was already starting to kind of have a bit of a downturn. I think the last Minions movie was an overperformance considering COVID restrictions, and this one is definitely an underperformance just because, making a very artistic Minions film just doesn't seem like the real formula of a Minions film, almost the antithesis of it, even if it is wonderful. Even if it is Kino as they call it, but I don't think that's not in the vocabulary of most Despicable Me fans. So I think I don't think those things necessarily meshed in the same way for what is the built-in pre-existing audience. And I'm not saying that they can't grow to love this film. It just the franchise has already been trending downwards a little bit. Now this is the first most noticeable hit a bit, and it's still gonna make its money back because they do all their stuff in France where labor laws and everything just makes that cheaper and easier to put out. But yeah, it's not quite the hit that I think people were talking about once they first started seeing the trailers and all that. So I can't say I'm gonna watch it anytime soon. I don't think I've seen anything since maybe Despicable Me 2. I don't know if I even finished 2, so not no hate against the series, I never got into it, and there's definitely an era where people kinda hated the series with, like, people and their, like, grandparents sharing, like, Minion memes on Facebook and stuff like that, but now there's been, like a cultural turnaround. The kids who grew up with it are now just, like, Star Wars prequel fans, yeah, the ones talking about these films and these characters and why they love them. So like I said, I really do think taking away the core Minion crew and not showcasing a new generation or like a connection to them, right? Or like precursors to them, having this be very distinctly just a new group of Minions to follow because of the time period. Yeah, I think that's kind of a big factor here that we're not really considering, which it sounds stupid, but just the way that the fan base has been about it, online at least, I wouldn't be shocked about. Funny that you mentioned Legend of Aang. I just was watching it right before we got on stream here. Uh, I'll say I watched it. I'm not gonna go to a theater in LA. It's a bit of a drive for me, and I'm not gonna go for just like 3 daytime showings. It's not really worth it for me. I would have loved to have seen this get a wide release though. It's silly. Like the animation in this from Studio Mirror is so good that it's just so annoying. Like, yes, I don't think the voice acting is 100% as good as it could be. It doesn't match up to Legend of Korra. It doesn't match up at all to these characters and their versions as teenagers in Avatar: The Last Airbender. But as a film about Aang as a central character, about what happens here and with the stunning animation behind it, the fight choreo, all of that is so awesome. I just find that the last third of it is very I don't know, like a very clean ending, very predictable ending. It takes away from the visual dynamism when you just see everything laid out pretty predictably. But, I didn't hate it. I'm never gonna say I hated it. I just think that where it was going for the first 2 thirds of the film were so much more engaging for me than what we got in the final third, that it definitely lost a couple points there for me. But, it's somewhere between a 3 and a 3.5 out of 5 for me. It's not bad. I just find it kinda strange that this type of story, because it wraps up so neatly, why you couldn't have, if you're not gonna ever release this as a movie, why not just spend some time and make this like a 3-part mini series, like, sorta drop? It bums me out. It really does, because I think there's a lot that could have been explored further in that final third that just happens. But, it's not bad. I think Avatar Studios has already been shafted by having the original showrunners leave the Netflix version. Season 2, I know, is an improvement for a lot of people, but not enough to get back a lot of people who didn't like season 1, and then not having a chance to have the original creators really get to do their thing. It's a big bummer, and yes, we got the Seven Havens trailer. It just doesn't look as visually impressive as how the first 2 series look like for me. I think they've it feels like it's kinda stripped back a little bit on the animation, and from what I've read, it's all being released on one day in October, which is really disappointing because I'm like, "Okay, if you can't even do weekly, at least do patch episode drops, do something so there's, like, a cultural moment." It almost feels like Paramount, ever since they've, like, forced Legend of Korra onto, like, Nick Online on their website to watch the last couple episodes and that clip episode and everything, they just have hated potential cash cow that has actually good storytelling. I know it doesn't fit that TVY7 age that they really like staying in with their animation, but you don't ruin good art if you can't sell merchandise. You just make more merchandise that makes sense for the people that are actually watching it. And it's silly now because it is an age franchise where you would have people our age and older definitely going trying to buy like the latest comics and books and t-shirts and games and tie-ins and merchandise all centered around this film. So a little frustrated by how things have kind of gone for Avatar. I will say I do find a lot of the fan base to be very annoying and cringy about a lot of things and making things about the Avatar franchise seem like it's always been perfect. Suddenly looking at Korra as like a wonderful character until the plot device of this new show kind of uses her in the worst of the ways, at least on outward appearance. Like a lot of more negative parts of the franchise have been towards any Avatar not named Aang, pretty much. So yeah, it kinda sucks, but I if you wanna check it out, I think it's definitely worth it. It should have at least gotten, like, 2 weeks limited run around the country. I think you could do that, and you would get a lot of your money back, and it's just really silly that Paramount just for decades plus now just simply has not understood how valuable, Avatar could be in terms of merchandise, and therefore, they're getting rid of, like, the fullest extent of what the art could be within this franchise.
Yeah, they fumbled Avatar so hard the last couple of years. It seemed like when they announced this movie, the hype was super high. And I don't know if it was just amongst our generation or the people in this circle, but I was really excited for it. I think everybody who was a fan of the original show was really excited for it. And then it just took way too long to come out. And then in the meantime, they dropped 2 mediocre seasons of live action show that really got, I think, a lot of people off the Avatar hype train. And then moving it to to Paramount Plus, and then really just dropping it unceremoniously. Like the first trailer comes out less than a month before the new movie, and then the whole thing with it being leaked online, all that type of stuff. They fumbled it so hard. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, but it was last year. I always make a list like 2 years before another year of my most anticipated movies, and I kind of shifted until January 1st. And last year, Avatar was a top 10 most anticipated movie for me until they moved it to Disney or to Paramount Plus. And then it dropped all the way down, and it just seemed like they never did anything else to get people like me, who are mostly interested in theatrical releases, to jump back on board. And so I'm looking forward to it. I'm not an ultra fan of Avatar, but I loved the series. I grew up on the series. I've rewatched the series as an adult and still really loved it. So it is something that I really like, but they didn't do anything to get people who like me, who are more fans but generally aware, average fans, to watch it day one. And so I'm looking forward to it still. I really wanted this to be great and be a theatrical release for the director, for Lauren Montgomery, who has done so many great DC adaptations and I think deserved a theatrical release. It would have been awesome to see her get a theatrical release for Avatar, but hopefully the next one she gets to do has a little bit better treatment. Brandon's next question: should James Gunn and Peter Safran rethink their DCU slate for God and Monsters Phase 1 to make Batman or Wonder Woman, since Supergirl flopped to Toy Story 5? Well, Wonder Woman is going to be soon. Batman, there were rumors about possibly a Batman casting being announced at Comic-Con. There are rumors every 2 weeks about a Batman casting being announced. But I would say for the first time since the DCU started, am I now kind of nervous about the general direction. I still think we'll get quality stuff. Like, I think the Batman 2 will be really great, even though it's technically, not in that timeline. Still James Gunn, Peter Safran produced, still DC Studios. So I think that'll be great. I think Clayface looks amazing, and I'm really excited for films like that. But yeah, I mean, Supergirl was always a strange one to do as your second movie. Supergirl, if you're following like an MCU outline, Supergirl would have been a phase 2 maybe phase 3 type of movie to do, because it's a redundant character. You just saw Superman. So one of the things that made Supergirl not work as a film, I think, was because releasing it as the second film and just having seen Superman, you want to double down, triple down on why are these characters different? Why are they both characters you should like? But even though they both wear the S, they're not the same person. They're very different from each other. So really forcing the issue on a lot of those things, I think, ruined a lot of character moments from the source material. Also ruined a lot of things about the film in general. Inconsistencies for the character within the film itself, inconsistencies from the comics, inconsistencies with what Superman just said was the way to look at the world. Like the morality and the like the way you're talking to your audience, explaining this world, this universe to your audience is so incredibly contradictory in Supergirl from what you just established in Superman, that it just is a very strange release, especially in hindsight. So I say all that to say, yes, if I was them, I would not cancel anything. Like, obviously, Clayface, super random to release, but looks great. I wouldn't cancel any projects they have going like that. Smaller scale projects, lower budget projects that, if they were to flop, may still get critical reception rather than, pushing out Supergirl, which is a lower budgeted blockbuster but still costs, almost $200 million. I would shelve or push back some of those movies like a Supergirl that are going to be anything that's 100 million plus, 125 million plus, and focus on Batman, focus on Wonder Woman, get this universe going. But I think the Clayfaces and those smaller scale projects are still one of the things that makes the DCU very different from the MCU. And I think those are worth pursuing still. I just think they have to now. I mean, now we're going to be next year 2 full years into the DCU starting. If you want to count Peacemaker season 1, we're like 5 years into the DCU, and we still don't have any word on Batman or Wonder Woman when those were announced with the original slate. So I think it doesn't feel like this is a universe until you have those 3 characters. And once you get those 3, then you can move forward with a bunch of other stuff. But I would just like to know there's a broader story. There's a universe here to get invested in. And I would like to know that there's other characters that we know and love, staples, pillars of that universe that are coming. We're getting Green Lantern in a couple weeks. I hope Hal Jordan, if he dies, then I think, I'm officially like very concerned about what they're doing with this. But yeah, so you got Lanterns, which I think looks a lot better. This last trailer was a lot better. Then you've got Superman next year, which I have no doubt will be at least good, if not great. So there are projects I'm looking forward to, and it's the weird thing is like Supergirl wasn't horrible. So, it wasn't Thor: Love and Thunder. It wasn't the Marvels. It wasn't some of these awful Marvel movies we've seen that have gotten me out of Marvel, or at least tentatively excited for a lot of their stuff coming out. But it just showed that this universe lacks a clear direction. It shows that this universe lacks an identity and an ethos about it, and what it means and what its heroes stand for and what it's trying to say. And it's going to be just movie by movie what they're trying to do with this universe. And I think that was the thing that was most disappointing about Supergirl. I saw Supergirl, it was okay. I forgot about it, 3 days later. It didn't ruin my life, but I think at the same time, it somehow was still really concerning for the DC universe as a fan who's been nothing but excited for all these movies and all these shows. So yeah, I'm very tentatively excited for Lanterns. I'm optimistic because it's James Gunn and because I like Superman a lot for next year's Superman movie. But pretty much everything after that, I am very concerned about, and I really hope that they can get a little bit of a win streak going here and build up with Lanterns, Clayface, Superman into whatever they have next, and they can ride that high and announce Batman and Wonder Woman. I mean, I can kind of understand maybe trying to lay low while Marvel's going with Doomsday and Spider-Man and Secret Wars and all that. But now's the time, hopefully, if Doomsday is great, now's the time that people are going to get back into comics, back into superheroes, maybe after a 3-4 year hiatus from that being a super, super popular genre. Hopefully, DC can kind of capitalize and say, hey, Marvel ended that era. Here's the next thing for you to watch. We'll see if they take the bull by the horns there.
Yeah, when it comes to DC, yeah, I mean, I saw Supergirl. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I just don't think that Woman of Tomorrow is adapted anywhere near as well as it could have been. I think that story obviously had to be tweaked to be a little bit more car centric, but yeah, it was a film, and that's not what DC needs right now. I always was very confused about why right after Superman you get a Supergirl film. I just yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against Millie. I think Millie absolutely rocks as Supergirl. I think she really shows that whatever we got in the 1984 Supergirl film was just a joke compared to like what we could really see with this characterization. How much that character has changed in more recent years after always kind of just being written by a lot of writers as just and especially in the animation world just as like hey, this is just a female Superman that you can look at, right? Like that's kinda how they played her, they always kinda shot her up into the future too with, like, Brainiac 5 and all that stuff, like, just whatever. They've done weird things with her character, but there's plenty that you can still do with her being a contemporary to her cousin and having actually been the older one first, and now the only one who can remember the stuff about their home planet, about what was different between their families too, according to this film, right? Like, it's not a doubling down of, like, this being a whole planet-wide ideology about, "Hey, you go off into space and you make super babies, like, and you rule these people," right? Like, it's a very different vibe. It's a more classic vibe. And there's a lot of interesting things that could be done there, and I thought Lobo was done well, just not for this film and story. It's just like, "Why are you here?" Right? So stuff like that just bum me out. But I'm not gonna like I'm happy that Saffron and Co have already come out and been like, we're not gonna like suddenly change a 10-year plan like that. We'll account for it and we'll adjust moving forward. But yeah, as cool it is to see as Clayface and how it looks, especially in a year where horror has just been absolutely dominant. I don't think this trailer has done anything to like make me lose hope for Clayface. I think it's only increased it. It looks pretty darn good. I just and then we have confirmation that this is a prequel to the Clayface that we see in Creature Commandos, which I think, tonally is gonna be very different, but, still, why not? I think it can work. I my one problem right now is that, okay, are we trying to do this whole universe as, like, a Superman-centric universe? Not saying that can't work, but there's a reason why they've made Batman films for 30 something years, 40 something years. He's just a lot more appealing to every version, every characterization and adaptation than Superman has been. Superman, some of his adaptations have just killed off versions of of like of interest that we could have seen on screen. There's a lot of people who love the Snyder films. I've never really loved anything past Man of Steel, and I thought Man of Steel could have worked as like a hey, this is the darkest he kind of gets as he starts to break through, and his more of his ideals and humanity shows through. And instead, we got whatever Batman versus Superman was with that character. I don't think Cavill wasn't capable of this that Cornsworth has done, but it's just so much more nicer, right? So yeah, I was happy with what Superman did last year, but it definitely again dealt with the sins of its previous adaptations. It took a long time to handle what the DCU was, what Superman Returns was, and all that, right? The frankly, everything since Superman 2 has been bad for Superman, right? Like it just has not been great. So it did well. I know Supergirl just paying for the sins of being a female-led superhero film and not being super well adapted, it can throw the whole bus off, and then hearing stuff about, like, "Oh, we're gonna get a Bane and Deathstroke film, and before we're gonna get a Batman film, and before we're gonna get a Wonder Woman announcement," I'm just like, "Oh, you can do all these fun, cool things, but you have to still have the big hitters. You still have to have the players that will become the original members of the Justice League, the Justice League 7 in place, and we just don't, right? Lanterns, though, that's where my optimism kinda lies again. I know I see what you're saying, thinker. If Hal dies, we riot. I think he dies, but not in the way we think. I think it's gonna be a little bit of bait and switch. I think they're trying to do their own modernized version of Parallax that isn't destructive to that character, and then slightly retconned into some sort of weird virus or whatever. Of I don't know. It just they're trying to do something like that. I wouldn't hate it if they almost make Hal the villain of like this phase one of DC or like one of the big hitters there. That's just me though, I don't really have that love and, desperateness about having Hal adapted. That being said, I don't know how this whole production has had such poor trailers too until this one. Like, you could have had the scene of him being a bit of a wise ass and using a construct to create a bottle opener and stuff like that, and that could have been in the first trailer. We legitimately had people saying in the first trailer, Green Lantern will not have any green in it. It's just gonna be a crazy murder mystery on Earth that Hal just gets too obsessed with, and that's it, right? And I mean, if it's gonna be part of DCU with the literal cosmic elements and the biggest cosmic force of the DCU, having it be like done something like a True Detective, it like, word for word, script for by script, yeah, it would have been horrible. But that's how that first trailer looked like for a lot of people, and going for a physical costume over contra costume, it's both ways. It's not one or the other. It can be both. But I don't mind this. I do like the design language for the most part of the suits that we have seen in the DCU. I hope they all get improved and get a little more classic over time. But I don't mind it. And now we get to see his full suit and everything. And it's like, oh, they're not going with, the white gloves, but they are going for like different shades of green. They are going for a very specific look for his suit. And that gives us a lot of hype for what's going to be the difference between his suit and Guy's suit and Guy's original suit versus his Justice Gang suit, and what's going to be ultimately John's suit, right? I don't know so much about Hal and John having such a big like rivalry of sorts. I've never really read or seen anything other than Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, and I never got this feeling that Hal Jordan is hated by what we're seeing out of this Aaron Pierce John. I think it's pretty funny from what we're seeing. I do like this swagger that Chandler's been carrying in the last two trailers, especially. But yeah, it took a while to even see stuff like who the villains are, like these Manhunters. In my mind, I thought it was Martian Manhunters until I messaged Liam about it. And I guess these were the original androids that also functionally change and could be anybody like Martians. So I guess sure, why not? The Guardians had their own reasons for imitating the Martians or something, right? But I think Lindelof, the team behind it, all that, I'm excited, right? I think it's gonna work. I do think ultimately for this to work as well as it can be, even if Hal is out of commission for a while or he's presumed dead, it's because he's gone off to do something in space and he gets to become the cosmic Green Lantern. And then you get to have John Stewart be the main Green Lantern, and then you get to let Guy be whatever he wants to be, just let Guy be Guy, right? I think that's ultimately what's needed, right? Is that what's going to happen? I don't know. Kyle Chandler, if he was 10 years younger, I would say yes. But we're also seeing flashbacks of him in what seems to be in the early 2000s. The first timeline is rumored to be 2016. Present day timeline is 2026. Like, I am very curious what Lindelof is trying to pull off with the story, but internally, people have been really liking it. So no matter what, I think it will be better than what we got from Supergirl. But the way things are going, everything kind of really hinges on this like almost Civil War sized film and Man of Tomorrow with the first real Brainiac adaptation in live action to pan out. For this is the first real push to have Lex Luthor be a more involved Superman villain who can sometimes be an ally. Like there's a lot that they're trying to do that DC animation has been so well ingrained into these characterizations of, but never live action. So we'll see what happens. I'm not ready for the future of the DCU until I really get to see the full entirety of what we see out of Lanterns.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on Lanterns, and I'm kind of looking forward to talking about it as it comes out because I if some of these things come to pass, I just fundamentally disagree with a lot of these choices early. I think that's been to me, like looking in hindsight and what they were gonna do with Superman, using All Star Superman as an inspiration, which For those of you who've read it, a very strange place to start for Superman. But then they kind of backtracked on that and decided to use kind of the outline of, Superman's relationship with humanity there as the backbone of the story, and then, tell a 100% completely different story. So they backtracked on that, but then Woman of Tomorrow is so fundamentally a story that invokes a pre-understanding of who Supergirl is and who the super, family is and what their pathos is and how they interact with the humanity and their backstory and their origin story. It's just not a first Supergirl movie story, especially the first Supergirl movie in 40 years. And the fact that the last Supergirl movie that came out, nobody remembers, nobody watches. It was horrible, and it's not considered, something that people go back to besides the most hardcore of completionists like myself who've wasted 2 hours watching it. So if Woman of Tomorrow made no sense to make. And then if you're going to Lanterns and you're starting with Parallax, which for some of our people who are watching this might not know what that is, it's basically the demon of fear possesses Hal Jordan and makes him do all these crazy things. Well, they came up with that idea after they just made Hal Jordan crazy, and then he dies and then comes back to life eventually one day. And it's like the thing that works about Zero Hour, the few things that work about Zero Hour are his history. You have to have history with this character for Parallax to work at all, even though it's not a great concept in general. And so you start out with a TV show where you introduce a character who's only had one movie and it was awful. And this time you have a version of Hal Jordan that looks nothing like the version that's in, the movie. It's a much older Hal Jordan. A lot of people won't even put two and two together, especially because the movie's not good. And a lot of people haven't seen it since 2011. People won't put two and two together. Those are even the same character. So you don't even have like a backbone for this character in film, even a bad backbone. So to jump into the story where he dies, that's completely built on past history and love for this character that was built up over 30 years into that story, makes no sense to me. I think there's so many things they can do. I understand going with John, honestly, in today's age, amongst the average Joe. John is the most well-known Green Lantern because he was in that show that we grew up with. He was in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. We loved it growing up, and it's still great, and people are going back and discovering it now. He's, has a couple popular memes as well, John. So, like, people know him as Green Lantern. I think the Hal Jordan look and costume might be a little more iconic, but I think a lot of people nowadays think of John as Green Lantern. So I understand wanting him to be the main Green Lantern, but I just don't understand killing Hal this early without establishing other stuff about him. I think one season of a show is not going to be enough. It's going to be disappointing to a lot of Hal fans. And even if they resurrect him one day, I mean, the rate at which DC is progressing with their universe, it might be in 15 years. And we'll see where Kyle Chandler is there at that point in his career. So yeah, not really happy if that's the story they're going with, especially as somebody who is a huge Green Lantern fan. And then also the best run of Green Lantern ever by far is Hal Jordan. And so he's the one that they really should be building this universe around. I don't mind him being a little older, but he should be a part of this story. So yeah, lots of thoughts there. But yeah, I was talking to a guy in a comic book store the other day too about Supergirl, and it was just like, I just don't understand why start with Woman of Tomorrow. It's a fundamental Supergirl story now, but it's built on 70 years of this character's history, 60 years of this character's history. It's not built on like, oh, we created this character last week and this is our introduction to her. Like, you have to have a little bit of knowledge of that character to move into that story. So yeah, hindsight's 2020. I wish they did other things with it, but unfortunately, that's what we got. Brandon's last question. We kind of just talked about this, so we'll briefly gloss over it. Was it a bad choice? Supergirl director Craig Gillespie, that did I, Tonya and Cruella, adapted a completely new story with Mad Max tone, then keeping it same to Tom King's Woman of Tomorrow. Yes and no. I mean, I think they should have done a different story in general for that, but I think the story they did tell fundamentally doesn't understand what happened in that story. I mean, I know even the writer like had quotes misunderstanding what happens at the very end of that book. So I think top to bottom, the production didn't seem to understand what that story was trying to say. And then it's also a story that relies on your knowledge and your love of the character of Supergirl, who Supergirl's had a crazy weird history too. Like she was dead for 20 years in the comics, replaced with another version of Supergirl that wasn't Supergirl. You know, they've done a lot of crazy things with Supergirl over the years too. And so she's not really a that's why she's not really an A-list character like some other like the Green Lanterns, you know, like I would say Hal's the A-list character, but John, Guy, Kyle, they're all right there as the next tier. There's not much separating them, even though they're all Green Lanterns. Supergirl was never there because she was dead for so long. When comic book storytelling was getting less pulpy and was getting more popular, she was already dead. And then before that, she was just part of the kind of adventure of the week style pulpy storytelling, but never really had her own book. And so it's just an interesting decision all the way around to do what they did with her, and then also to make that the second movie of their series. And then to piggyback off of that Clayface question, will it make more money? Then I assume you mean Supergirl. I think it definitely will, or at least make as much, which would be a huge success for them. Because 100 million for Clayface would be really solid. But I think with, like you said, Brandon, the success of Obsession, Backrooms, Clayface very much so invokes The Substance, other big horror films we've seen over the last few years. Horror is once again at its peak. It seems like every 7 to 10 years, horror rises again, and we're in this kind of new wave of horror that is just dominating the box office. And I think Clayface couldn't come out at a better time. And it also is coming out, I believe it's end of September or beginning of October, so it's right in the midst of the Halloween season. I think it's going to do really well. I think it takes strong critical reception for it to be a 50, 60, 70 million dollar opening. But I would be shocked if it doesn't get at least 25 to 30 opening weekend, which puts it right on pace with Supergirl. And I think with it coming out in Halloween season, it will have a little bit better legs than Supergirl ultimately had in the midst of this crazy packed summer blockbuster season. So I'm expecting pretty big things financially from Clayface. I think the only reason it would disappoint is if the movie just isn't that good. Then people might not get the word of mouth that's needed for horror to truly take off. And horror word of mouth is the thing that's getting people to go back weekend after weekend. And I think Clayface is going to need that for it to be a massive success.
Yeah, I mean, I can't add too much more to that. I do believe Clayface will do a bit more than Supergirl. Horror is cheaper. It's just a simple fact, right? And I know there is a CGI element, obviously, to Clayface, but I don't think we're gonna get the traditional Clayface where you get to see the brown sludge moving around for like the majority of the scenes. That's probably gonna be more towards the end at most. Um, yeah, I mean, it's also gonna be our first version of the DCU Gotham, and it already looks like a mix of modern, a mix of like stuff that just hasn't changed and will never change. I've always found the Art Deco style of Burton's to be a little too much at times, but this idea of like anachronistic elements being shuffled all throughout the city, that I've always kind of liked about Gotham. Of like these are things that we can't kind of let go, or it won't let us go, and that lets it be its own character. So we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with Craig Gillespie as a director. I just don't think him and James Gunn just saw things eye to eye, and I think it also fundamentally comes down to the writer, who I think was also is also working on something else. Titans
She's doing Wonder
or
Woman and Teen Titans.
Wonder Woman and Teen Titans. Yeah, I mean, for me, I still hope Audrey Arjona is cast as Wonder Woman. I know ideally you get someone who's a lot taller and is a complete relatively fresh face for something of this caliber if they're gonna kind of go the same way did Cornsworth as being hired on for Superman. But is that gonna happen? I don't think so. But if you have her at least show up, I don't think there's anything wrong with her being Maxima. She's such a great actress. I really would like her to just be Wonder Woman. And if you get at least two parts of the Trinity in place, and they're the more fantastical powers, and then kind of figuring out how to balance them against the Green Lantern, a Blue Beetle of sorts, right? Like everybody's seemingly being thrown into Man of Tomorrow, and then you can just have one quick hint at like not even Batman, but just Bruce Wayne in Man of Tomorrow. I'd be very happy, and I think that'd be great. But the problem is, are we going to run into that situation of like an Iron Man 2 where you're just adding in so many different elements and storylines and future setup? And what are they leading to? Are we leading to something with the metahumans and everything going on there, kind of like how we saw in DCEU, and we get Darkseid and all this stuff? Or are we going to something like the New Frontier and going for something that's just never been adapted for the conclusion of this chapter, right? While still doing all these other random stories like Clayface. I don't know. I've always enjoyed the idea of DCU this time around having different genres. But yeah, putting everything on Superman's shoulders, as great as they are, even his scenes in Supergirl are some of the best parts of the whole film. I don't know if I can trust the DCU fully moving forward, especially with some of the gambles they seemingly are taking with lanterns, to not have at least the Trinity established by the end of like 2029. And I know Robert Pattinson's Batman is making this harder. Matt Reeves is definitely making this harder. J.J. Abrams has made it even harder by pushing back the release of Batman Part 2. But yeah, I can we really say that people who are gonna see, like, maybe, like, a darker blue Batman suit and a little bit more comical and the full Bat family are not gonna be able to, like, differentiate between that and a darker crime-focused younger Batman with Pattinson? I could see that argument before in Star Wars. I don't really think I can see that, especially if a Batman looks so very different visually and power set and skill-wise in the DCU and a little bit more fitting for a fantastical world than this very grounded, very edgy Batman, right? So I sound negative here, but I'm still very positive. I gotta wait and see now.
Next up is HD GameTube, who says, hello there, HD. Glad to see you back. Really interested in Legacy, and I definitely want to read it. Do you think that Twin Crossroads will end up enhancing Legacy further since both touch on Leia's time training? Well, we kind of talked about that a little bit at the beginning of the stream, and the book isn't out yet, so not trying to give too much away. But like you said, yeah, there are a lot of moments in the book where Leia reflects on her time training with Luke that's referenced in The Rise of Skywalker in order to kind of come up with the best answers she can for Rey, and how would her experience with Luke shape the way she would teach Rey based on the experience she had with her own Jedi Master. And so I would imagine they both connect vaguely. I mean, obviously, Legacy takes place about 30 years later, so I don't think there's going to be too much crossover without another book after Legacy that continues with the story that might reference Twin Crossroads. But I would imagine that some of the insights we've learned about her in Legacy and her time with Luke will come back and be, doubled down upon or reiterated or important for some of the storytelling in Twin Crossroads. And that would be definitely welcome, considering that Legacy was a book that I felt tried to do too much with a short amount of page time. I think something that kind of picks up some of the threads that the book ultimately has to dump towards the end of the novel to just wrap up would be certainly great to see when it comes to interconnected canon book storytelling.
Yeah, I do think Legacy will be enhanced by Twin Crossroads. Will it be specifically set up to have word for word references to Agent Kloss and Legacy be 100% the same? No, I don't think so, because I think even the Leia that is discussing her training in the year before Ben's birth, she's she's happy, she's having fun, but she's always kind of more emphasizing the relationship between her and Luke and the dynamic that they kind of foster from the Galactic Civil War into this new age and what it really means to not just be friends but siblings too, and how she's in so many ways like an Anakin. She's impatient. She wants to do everything and all that. Um, but the timing of it, of course, a year can be a lot. Is it enough? No, not always. But yeah, I mean, it's gonna be very interesting because there's also an emphasis on this story being a lot more about lost Jedi information, prequel era understandings of the events that shaped their births and what their families were like and what they're gonna probably learn about. We what would we get, a Tatooine ghost, that took that long for Leia and Luke to like really kind of go into stuff like that in the EU here, at least with this timing wise, with supposedly a fairly peaceful transition for Coruscant, kind of digging into like Jedi chambers and all that, what that would mean for them. I think it'll just stand on its own too. I think Legacy will be improved for the stuff that's already great in Legacy. But Leia in a lot of the Book of Legacy, and not to spoil anything, there's a reason why Tython is the home of the Jedi for a long time. It has an effect on anybody that's Force sensitive, and Leia is definitely going through her own thing. So I feel like this will be a lot more of a classic Leia description of what she is like as a person, what she's been doing, how she's juggling all these different parts of herself that are all really important to the state of the galaxy, and still have that sibling connection explored. But is it going to be as kind of dreamy and like semi lucid? No, I think it's going to be very in your face and all that. So, and that's what I meant way earlier in the stream. We're getting these pseudo sequels where storylines and elements of storylines and hopefully characters moving forward are still referenced and brought up in other stories, even if they're not direct sequels to these stories, but they do still play an effect on the grander story of a character, the grander arc of a character, the grander personality changes of these characters, especially, and then allows us to still have, a chance to have trilogies and duologies and whatever moving forward, but feel that, hey, even if we are getting these one off books in the future still, and even if they are still character focused, if I at least read these 3 sort of together, I'll get, like, a pretty strong picture of certain key events in their life, at least how they felt at that point versus how they felt about it years later on the line.
HD's next question was, if you were to adapt one canon book for a movie and one canon book for a series, which books would you pick, and why would you pick those to specifically be a movie or a series? I think for a series, it would be between two for me. It would be the Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, or it would be Alphabet Squadron. I think Alphabet Squadron, the reason I picked that is even though I like both Thrawn canon trilogies better, I think it lends itself perfectly to an Andor-esque series. And we say that, meaning a lot of different things, but the tone of Alphabet Squadron is very much so in line with the tone of Andor. It's very serious. It's very much so a book that dives into the mental side of war and what it does and how it affects the soldiers and all of that stuff. It's much deeper than most Star Wars books. And sometimes that can be great. Like, I think it finds the perfect balance in Victory's Price in the final book. But the first 2 books have a hard time finding a little bit of a balance between the pace of going all in on certain characters, going all in on story, and then also tying in and connecting to the broader New Republic era. So I think, honestly, a series treatment for that could be really great. You could strip it down and simplify it a little bit more, while also still diving into a really well-rounded group of characters. And it also doesn't really tackle any of the main OT characters, so you could tell a New Republic era story that's important, that gives you a little bit more of a grasp on what happened in the early New Republic era, how the Empire fell, but also doesn't have to force in, a ton of characters that you don't know, that either, the actors are dead and you have to either recast or do CGI deepfake, or you would have to decide what to do with those characters. It's really just Hera. It's kind of the only big legacy character that's really important to those stories, and you already have her cast in live action. So I think that would be a really cool series to adapt. The other one, Ascendancy, would be awesome, but you would have to commit like fully to that. I know it's 3 books, but you would need 5 or 6 seasons to adapt that story if you wanted to do it properly, and it would be all in. You'd have to really go all in on world building and all that type of stuff. And so I think it's a little harder sell to the broader audience, considering it doesn't really take place in the Star Wars galaxy most people know and love. So those would be my 2 picks. I think for a one-off movie, there are tons you could do because most of canon is full of one-off stories. I think right off the bat in my head, one I would have loved to see would have been Bloodline, but obviously Carrie Fisher has passed away, so I don't think you could do that story with an older Leia with anybody else. You would need Carrie. So I'd say, Shadow of the Sith would be something that would be a really cool movie. Brotherhood would have been a cool movie. We've constantly heard about, oh, maybe they'll go back and do an Anakin Obi-Wan Clone Wars era story. Brotherhood would have been a cool one to do. I think, both actors are a little too old to do that specific story, but that would have been a cool one at the time. Lost Stars would have still been a cool one. So there are a lot of great one-offs in canon to do movies. It's hard to pick one, but I really do think Alphabet Squadron could have made a really great series, and still could if they wanted to eventually go down the road of adapting the books themselves into, a truncated version for TV.
Yeah, I want to say Shadow of the Sith would be some my pick for a one movie adaptation. I think it has enough to do more, but I found that book to be really well paced and it's very scant on stuff about Luke's Academy on purpose and just kind of really focuses on like m- everything about setting up the overall narrative that's going to be played out through the sequel. So I like it. I think it's a very interesting adventure. Shows the height of Master Luke. I've always been a fan of a Luke that has to kind of wing it and trust the Force and trust in the goodness of the Force and himself and make up for technical lack of knowledge in some points. Obviously, original trilogy comes out. We know that these Vader and Obi Wan are broken old men, but Luke in his prime still doesn't have their knowledge. It's just the simple fact. You're going from an eradication of an entire culture, religion in so many ways, and done a at a imperial level throughout the galaxy, at a government level. People get money, get promotions to destroy and call out any force users, right? Of course, that whatever survives is in the underworld and scanned and pieced together. So when you get something as big as this story and exploring a dark side villain that's different than what we've ever seen, seeing how so much of the galaxy is still recovering and changing, and the renewal of the Jedi is still taking its time. It's not quite going to be the Jedi of before. Yeah, I thought it's all handled well there. My one thing with it though is that if it becomes a series, you'd have to focus a lot more on Ben. And at that point, and I hopefully by in the next 5 years, we at least get some sort of like book series about teenage Ben Solo or some animation or something that can really delve into that. For a series, original Thrawn trilogy of canon, just kind of going through all that sort of stuff, even with the tightness of the Star Wars Rebels timeline and how that affects the storytelling, especially of the second and third books. But I still think those are really good. I would not be opposed to having something like an Aftermath be adapted for a TV show. I think you've already taken the best elements of that stuff, like the interludes and everything, and made it work into like pretty important elements of the Mandalorian. I think you could do that without the pros, but just taking the story that's there on paper, I think is actually quite solid. It's just that how you read it kind of sucks, especially with that first book and how it's promoted was this is the new Tron trilogy, and that, it was never going to be the case without having our OT big three, right, or big four, including Lando, right? So yeah, it had a lot going against it, to be honest, but I think now in a day and age where we're begging for any sort of world building that can be connected between early New Republic and the New Republic that falls at the start of The Force Awakens. Would absolutely love seeing stuff like that. Would absolutely love seeing more about Jakku and the power, the observatory there, and seeing if we could follow up with like Snoke and his purple cloak navigators, bringing together all the different pieces that survived from Battle of Jakku onwards. Anything with Ray Sloan, I think would be great as a series, as her as like the first ruler of the First Order, seeing what it is to see her go from either someone who's got some values, but is a little bit more, very coded as like still an imperial at the heart, to becoming corrupted or possibly becoming better over time, and then therefore becoming a target for Palpatine, for Snoke, for the eventual replacement of a bureaucratic and well-meaning empire of sorts, even if it still has a lot of flaws and evilness to it inherently, and then you get to see the takeover by a Snoke and how he kind of manipulates and pulls on the fanatical, on the hype, on the trends and the fads that would just take a bunch of brainwashed acolytes and a bunch of kidnap children who are flash trained and really make a whole story about like, yeah, no wonder this is a different organization than the empire, because hey, these people are always constantly looking to be as evil as possible and cut out other people from the line of work and try to take another spot above each other. And it's not just a hey, we're all super well trained in the empire and this is just how things go in the bureaucracy. It's like a no, screw the bureaucracy, everything's kind of crazy and potent and kinetic here because we believe in like crazy, s- you know, dark side worshiping at the core of the power here, and everything is designed for a proper takeover of the galaxy, not a hey, this is a government switch off, right? So I think that could have been something really good to see. So if you don't adapt Aftermath properly, maybe having almost like a sequel to the Aftermath, but from the First Order perspective, would be fantastic, especially because we still live in a day and age where while people can probably tell you the difference a lot more between the resistance and rebellion now more than ever, I still think a lot of people are confused with the First Order versus the Empire, especially with the further complication of the Final Order and how that, superseding plans by Palpatine affect and ultimately limit even the potential of the chaos that the First Order could have really unleashed.
So we only have time for a few more questions, so we're gonna have to run through these relatively quickly. We're almost at 2 hours, and these Q and A's that we do once a month will probably be a little longer than we used to make them, just because we haven't gotten to talk to you guys in a month. But we're still trying to keep it to the 2 hour-ish mark, so we're gonna run through these as much as we can. So next we have HD, who says, "I hope they show Ahsoka season 2 and Starfighter trailers at D23, and they post it online publicly. I think it's unfair to keep it exclusive for the events. Most fans can't attend. If it's exclusive for a day or two, fine, but forever/months, it's too much." I agree and disagree with you on a few things there. So one, I disagree. I don't think we're going to see Ahsoka season 2 or Starfighter trailers at D23. I think they might show people some stuff, though. That's where I agree with you. Like, I could see there being, let me say it this way. Marvel chose specifically not to talk about anything to do with Disney Plus at Comic Con. I think they talk a little bit more about Disney Plus because they have Vision Quest coming. They have some other things coming. So D23 might be fairly Disney Plus focused. I could see Ahsoka season 2 with it having been originally a 2026 release, with us expecting that we're going to, get something from it in the next or I guess 6 months. It should be almost coming out, but next like 3-4 months, I could see them showing some footage there at D23 for that. Starfighter, I'm a little mixed on as well. I wouldn't be shocked if they show a clip or a behind the scenes little reel, because at that point, by the end of August, we'll be like 9 months from the movie. So it's going to be, it's not that far away. But at the same time, Doomsday is such a huge focus of all of Disney's marketing efforts right now. They just don't seem to want to run both at once. And I think they see the turn of the year as all in on Star Wars for 6 months versus this all of 2026 and especially the last half of 2026, they're all in on Marvel. So we'll see what they do. I wouldn't be shocked if they show clips to people privately. As for the exclusivity, I think you have to keep things exclusive for people at these events. Otherwise, there's no reason to buy tickets to go to these events. But I understand that it's frustrating, and I would prefer if they, especially having, not getting to really get to go to any of these things either, I would prefer if they put it out after like 2 or 3 weeks, or at least a variation of it. I would prefer if they put something out to the public and then also showed a clip or a small segment to people privately. I think that's the best of both worlds, is to show a little bit of a scene or a special package that nobody else gets to see at the event, and then also release something publicly that satisfies everybody. I think that would have worked for the Avengers Doomsday thing the other day, but they decided to drop the trailer at the beginning of the week rather than saving it for the day of the panel. So I think if they drop that on the day of the panel, people aren't as frustrated with not getting to see anything that was shown there. So that's where I am with the conventions. As somebody who has been to a few, like I've been to 3 D23s and I've been to one Celebration, going next year to Celebration. It is nice to be in that room and get to see something that's exclusive. Like I think they shouldn't take that away from people who can go and want to spend their money on going, because otherwise there's that it loses 50% of the appeal to actually go to one of these conventions, is you're going for the exclusive stuff. But they should do better about giving the public at least something to see to satiate both parties.
Yeah, I mean, I think even a bigger problem for me is that, like, I remember when we went to Celebration in 22, and you see all these monitors outside of these rooms, which again, not everyone got to go to the main stage. You're in these screening rooms with like a slight delay, just because that's how the tech works, and you're catching up on stuff that's happening that in the convention center that you're on. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you see these TVs outside of these screening rooms and they're not turned on. So if people could at least be able to see it, maybe in, like in the convention center, I'm sure it leaks even more, and that's probably what they hate about it. But this extreme exclusivity in this day and age, where like everybody's getting better at finding ways to leak stuff. Like I'm sure people are figured out how to do meta glasses and stuff like that, and more nonchalantly and not get caught about it. But I mean, I saw the San Diego Comic-Con trailer. It's super blurry for Doomsday, but the audio's been definitely, like, cleaned up and pushed all the way around the internet and everything. It's just like, why can't we just get a time delay? Okay, it doesn't come out today, but maybe it comes out in a week or something. They just don't do that. They make it like an exclusive thing that you'll never see the exact same thing online when it finally gets out there, and that just I don't know, I just don't think that works, especially with these franchises of the MCU and Star Wars both needing jolts. Why limit how many people could see that, all right? I understand maybe when, things are going well, right? It becomes like an almost like an exclusivity thing, like buying like a Supreme clothing drop, there's only so many, but if you get it, great, good for you. But that's when things are going great, that's when things are selling like hotcakes. That's not really the case for either franchise right now. It does seem like Marvel, with the work it did last year, is poised to make that turn, but those moves are still all part of the MCU direct line, right? And they didn't even get to stuff like Vision Quest and everything. They barely mentioned it, but that's going to be the final chapter of the Wanda and Vision trilogy put together. That's something that's probably one of the better viewed kind of series and miniseries put together with Agatha, with WandaVision, and now Vision Quest leading into a movie, and not feeling like there's going to be a massive drop off when you do get to see a Vision again, when you do get to see a Wanda again. But yeah, I mean, Star Wars needs it too. Like, unfortunately, Star Wars doesn't have that same direct line because they put out Mandalorian Grogu, which was a very low stakes plot wise for the Mandalorian past season 3, which we haven't seen anything in 3 seasons, 3 years after a third season that was not as well received as the first two, right? So it's like, okay, that's fine, but what's the momentum for Starfighter? We don't have anything because Hunt for Ben Solo was rejected by Iger and co. Right? That's a bummer. We could have probably had that first, and then a Starfighter, or Starfighter, and then Hunt for Ben Solo on the docket. we don't really know what comes next after Starfighter, and that's a big bummer and a worry too, because you're like, okay, let's say this does so great. Do they actually have plans for something next? No, because there's a chance of jumping into a Dawn of the Jedi, but now that Mangold seemingly is off of that too, now that Charmin is supposedly off of Rey's New Jedi Order, like, what comes next? I am excited for Starfighter. I think it'll do well, but I have to be cautious about how well it's gonna do and say, like, 650 to 700 million. I think that's probably, like, the ballpark estimate, and I think that'd be pretty good. I do think Sean Levy, while people don't love him and his writer, I think he can do great action, and he can find a lot of intimacy in these moments between the breaks of the action. The question's always been, is he gonna have a strong enough script, and is he gonna have enough time visually to craft something? I like Deadpool and Wolverine a lot, but it is a very visually bland movie. I'm hoping with being part of a franchise, being with a now modern producer and Gosling and the reputation that's kind of come about him and what that means to be working behind the camera, working to kind of create these production shoots, that we do get like a really fully realized version of Starfighter. But what comes before it and what comes after it? What's the momentum? What's going to take place, right? I don't know. So you have to be already showing at least like a BTS sizzle reel or something with D23 where we can get so much information without explaining it plot wise and character wise and story wise. You need to have even more for Doomsday, at like maybe another cast announcement or something for whoever has not been shown in these first two trailers. This exclusivity thing, I feel like peaked around 2019, 2020. After that, it's just kind of become like a really annoying hindrance, especially when people are taking a lot more time considering, am I even going to go to these big conventions and these, company specific conventions when, I'm not even guaranteed to see the trailer because I don't make it to the room, right? So these events have not become easier to get into, it's harder. So I'm not a fan of it. I hope that it changes. It's just not. But I think for Star Wars, especially, if we don't get any Starfighter promotion at D23, I start worrying a little bit because of how long it took for Mando and Grogu to even get started.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is there's so many conventions now too. There's so many Comic Cons. There's so many fan events that these studios have kind of run it into the ground where it used to be, go to the one big one a year. Every other year, D23 is also there. But outside of those two, there weren't all these other things. Now you got Celebration, you got D23, you got New York Comic Con, you got the some of the Anaheim conventions that they do for comics. You have the San Diego Comic Con. There's just so many things going on. Plus, they'll create days randomly just to drop news. So, yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who used to be really into that type of stuff, right? Like I used to be super into the exclusivity type stuff. I loved going to these conventions. I really enjoyed Celebration 22 because it felt like a return to the like the real world after a couple of years of COVID. But I don't know what it is about maybe it's the lack of truly exciting stuff going on in my favorite franchises, but there's just not that much enthusiasm in me anymore. Maybe I'm just getting old, but I don't really care that much about going to see all these exclusive things anymore. But I do think as a consumer who wanted to see that stuff, why would I spend money at least going to these conventions if I don't get something exclusive? So I think the perfect balance is what they used to do in the 2010s, which is drop a trailer online and then show the people there an exclusive clip. Eventually, everybody's going to see the movie, right? So we're all going to see everything that's shown, whether it's a trailer, whether it's a clip, whatever. You're going to see it at some point. It's never going to disappear forever. But people who used to pay to go to this stuff would get to see a clip, or they'd get to see an extended trailer, or they'd get to see a behind the scenes package that nobody else would get to see. That's how they should do it, and they should still drop a trailer or some form of marketing online for everybody. Recently, Marvel's just been playing everything really close to the chest, and I'm not really sure about that strategy specifically. Okay, we're going to have to fire through these next few. I'm going to read a few and answer them very quickly, and then I'll let Cynic answer, and then we're probably going to call it a night here. So first is HD, who said, how would you rate the movie novelizations? I've only seen people talk about Revenge of the Sith, but not so much everything else. The next best one to me is Rogue One. Rogue One is a really well done adaptation. After that, it's kind of like pick your poison on what style you like. If it is it just adapt the movies, well, Phantom Menace has two or three extra scenes, uh, and then like Sonic said earlier, the original trilogies novelizations, the novelty in them is that they are an alternate version of the movie. It's like basically the movie with where the prequel versions are like the movie with deleted scenes added in. The original trilogy versions are George Lucas's original scripts with some things that he just cut really early and changed before production even started, but they already had the novelization down the pipeline. They didn't really care about it, so they just said, put it out there. And the funny thing is, the novelization for the OT, all of them came out like a month or 2 months before the movie came out. So, like, you could read the whole story and then go see the movie later. And it had a lot of the main plot points, but just in a little bit different. Attack of the Clones is one that's kind of in between, where it's structured with it has all the deleted scenes that you can go watch online or on the DVD or whatever, but it's structured a little bit differently to really enhance the Anakin and Shmi Skywalker relationship. Really trying to get you invested in Shmi, get you invested in her new life with the Lars family, getting you interested in Owen and Klieg and all those types of characters. So Attack of the Clones to me is probably the third best one because it really does a strong job of enhancing things that are already impactful in the movie while also delivering you a pretty solid adaptation of the story. I do think the final third act of Attack of the Clones is a little bit short compared to the film, but all the novelizations are, because the third act of films, you have a bunch of action sequences. Third act of books, it's hard to make, action sequences a lot of chapters, so you truncate it so it feels a little weird. But Attack of the Clones is really solid. So yeah, I would say Revenge of the Sith, Rogue One, Attack of the Clones are the standouts to me. The rest are all mostly adaptations of the story you've already seen, but the OT are interesting because they're very different versions of those stories. Brandon says, do you think the Odyssey was good depending on if you've seen it or not, even though half the internet was mad at Nolan's casting before it came out? Yeah, I thought it was great. I loved it. It it lived up to the hype to me. I haven't seen it a second time yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing it. Literally every single IMAX showing is sold out. I got to see it in IMAX opening day, but I want to go back and see it in 70 millimeter, which the closest one to me is San Francisco. So I'm planning on going to see it there. Metreon Theater is still my favorite theater I've ever been to. So I really like to see it there, but God, it's crazy. 6 a.m. showings are sold out. So, like, it's just nuts. But yeah, loved it. I thought it was great. Casting, as whatever people were upset about with the casting, all of it I thought was worthwhile, and it was a really strong movie. Let's see, one more, and then pass it over to you, Cynic. The Critical Thinker says, you guys are finally back. Luke and Leia book has potential if it avoids sequel references. I haven't read Revis's other work, but the premise is nice to have early on in a way the EU couldn't do. I just hope it's executed well. I hope so too. I don't think it will have sequel references because it takes place like 30 years before the sequels, but I do hope it has some setup and builds up some things that are just dumped into the lore in the sequels, like the Luke and Leia master and apprenticeship. That's just like a brief random scene to give to give Rey an extra lightsaber in the movie. You want that padded out. So if that's what you mean by sequel trilogy connections, then I hope it has a lot of that. If you're talking about random stuff with like Snoke or stuff like that, I don't know if we need that necessarily in this book, but pretty much anything could help build out that era.
Yes, let's work through these questions here. Um, can't say anything about novelizations, honestly. That's something that's more in Liam's lane. I think the only one I've read is probably Revenge of the Sith with Stover, and we already know that's the best. That's got a special version this past year, specifically because of how well it's been received. As far as the second question goes, Brandon, I think it wasn't half of the internet was mad with the casting. I think you saw a little a little group of people being loud as always, as it's been for 15 plus years. It's exhausting, it's annoying, but whatever. Odyssey is not real. I can understand if you're trying to make things be as real to, the time era, but then frankly, the ancient Greeks look a lot closer to Himesh Patel than they look to Matt Damon or to Tom Holland, right? So there's a lot of things here about the casting that I've always found really silly. If they really want to be super accurate too, I think you should have been more accurate with the plot. The bag of winds and seeing Achilles in hell and stuff like that. Those are important things and connects to the Iliad. But I've seen just recently a huge uptick of people trying to make Troy to come out as like some incredible film, and it was marketed as one, but it was never as good as that. And even when they made the film, the writers and directors were like, "We know we made some pretty big changes. There's maybe like two lines from the Iliad in our story adaptation here, all right?" And it wasn't super well received. It did well enough in theaters, but it's not a great movie. You can watch clips and all that. Brad Pitt is fine, kind of playing a reluctant soldier, but everything else about it's childish, it's silly, it's just people who look great and stand around, but there's nothing about it that's good to me. And what you see with Odyssey, you see premium filmmaking. There's a reason people like myself and Liam are waiting to see it again in IMAX 70 millimeters. That it'll probably have an exclusive 70 millimeter run in IMAX, while everything else is kind of going through the IMAX calendar because that's just how much demand there is for this film. So yeah, it was not half of the internet. It was just a small fraction. People being super mad. Um, Lupita Nyong'o's in this film so little, right? Because this is not about Troy. This is about the Odyssey, and she kills it. So if you're wondering about that, whatever. If you're worried about Elliot Page or something, I'll say I didn't love the first scene of Elliot's in the film, but I also think this is just a problem with this being shot fully on IMAX. This is the most obvious the cutting between shots in a Nolan film has been. He cuts pretty quickly from shot to shot in general, but this one, especially that first 10 minutes, it felt like a lot was happening to me without, a lot of depth or like the vibe of the film really settling in at that point. So I didn't really love Elliot's first scene, but then Elliot's scene that like defines the film is just like a monologue, and it's so damn good. It's like these actors are not simply just hired by Nolan because, oh, it's like reuniting with old friends. You're a Nolan actor if Nolan thinks he can make incredible films with you. It's just a simple fact. You don't see actors hired by Nolan and are expecting to give mediocre performances. Everybody usually, if not for their first Nolan film, by their second Nolan film, is going giving outstanding career best performances. So I I hear you what people were saying. There was some sort of culture war backlash starting to it. This movie is gonna make a 1.4 to $1.5 billion, and it's not making that because of people being slightly miscast and having a diverse cast. It's making that because it's an incredible film, a very smart adaptation, and Nolan taking a blank check and taking something that was in so many ways considered unfilmable and making it work. If you got criticism for what they're adapting directly from the story of the Odyssey and it feels cut out, or you feel like even Percy Jackson did the Odyssey better in the first book of the Percy Jackson series, I fully understand and accept that. But the diversity thing never bothered me because it's a fictional mythological story. It's the same as people who perform in plays who are obviously not from Britain from the 1600s and earlier when Shakespeare was writing, but hey, they put on a great performance to get the spirit of the character. That's how it felt like for me watching this film. And frankly, your ears and everything are assaulted by just the visuals and the sound that you have no time to be upset about some little opinion online that has no weight and value to it. And finally, critical thinker, the Twin Crossroads book is going to have sequel trilogy references in the sense of like we're going to understand what happened on Agent Claws. I think it's going to have a lot more prequel references because we're going to Coruscant and really understanding the relationship between the parents of the twins and what they left behind, what Coruscant was left behind by. A little bit more clarity on the situation of Aftermath trilogy series and what has happened after Masameda kind of signed over Coruscant to the New Republic. If that was all that was there, maybe see more acolytes of the Beyond. I think we'll see stuff like that. But if you're saying none of that, then there's no way for in canon for Luke to have trained Leia because that was the only time period and that was the primary location where their training happened. If you're saying stuff like Liam said with Snoke and all that, I agree. I don't want that in the first year post episode 6, post Battle Jakku, but that stuff eventually will happen. It just doesn't have to happen and be connected to Luke and Leia because that's way more important to when Luke is 20 years old and Leia is fighting to become the first senator position in the dead block between the centrists and the populists in Bloodline. At this point in time, no, this should be as close to OT vibes as possible and fill in the prequelness in a way that Dark Nest trilogy and Tatooine Ghost retroactively had to do after decades of EU storytelling and didn't always feel earned or honest. And especially, I've never always loved the idea of just Leia forgiving Anakin just like that. I think the way that she's handled her relationship with her father is way smarter and way more realistic considering he straight up tortured her. Luke can be the optimist and the idealist even with his arm chopped off. He gets a cool robot arm out of it. Leia, I don't think the movie doesn't show it, but I don't expect her being too kind to her father who was in charge or at least directly involved with the destruction of her home planet. This is a little different.
Well, I think that's going to have to wrap up the stream tonight, everybody. We've gone about 2 hours and 20 minutes, so this is one of our longest streams we've done. But thank you so much for joining. We're glad to be back. We did take a pretty big hiatus because there was nothing to talk about with Star Wars, but our plan, once again, for those people who weren't at the beginning of this stream or didn't watch the last one, is to be back as much as there's news. So we're planning on covering any big news story that drops, whether it's a trailer, whether it's the announcement of some new movie or show, or big, huge announcement for book drops. We're planning on covering the news, and then we're also planning on doing one of these Q&A sessions a month. So it just so happened that Comic-Con happening, we thought we kind of could combine both into one. So we'll be back much sooner than we were last time we streamed, where we streamed at the beginning of June and then haven't been back till now. So we should be back at some point, probably mid-August or so, for the next stream, unless we get some news before then. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the content on the channel, enjoying the new format. Talking about Legacy, make sure you check out our review of that. We will have tons more stuff coming out soon. We've taken a little bit of a break these last few weeks, but as Star Wars starts to pick up, as movie news and all that starts to pick up, we'll start to get back into making more and more content. So appreciate y'all for sticking with us. Make sure you like the stream if you haven't already. Comment below, let us know what you thought if you're watching on replay. If you're watching on replay, make sure you keep an eye out on the live for any new streams that are coming out. We are going to try to schedule them a little bit further ahead of time when we know we're going to stream, just so you guys have an idea of when we're going live, since it's not as much on a specific schedule anymore. What else could we talk about? I guess make sure you hype it if you're on mobile, and make sure you check out all the other stuff that's coming out on the channel. If you're interested in the Odyssey, I did do a ranking of every Nolan movie on my other channel if you want to check that out as well. Thanks so much for watching the stream tonight, everybody, and we will see you all next time.